In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and video media online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Francis Moore Lepay's Diet for a Small Planet, 50th Anniversary Edition, just reissued. And this is from the introduction to the 50th Anniversary Edition. It starts out with a quote from George Orwell: "To see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle." I begin this journey with the realization that growing and eating plant-centered diets was a great choice. Today it's a no-contest necessity. Either we now make a big turn, or life on Earth as we know it is gone forever. Whoa, this blunt declaration rocks me. I'll admit it has taken me decades to get here, and I'm delighted now for this opportunity to share my learning journey with you, dear reader. You'll forgive me, though, if my first thoughts are of my own delight, as over the years, strangers have told me, "Your book changed my life." One story I'll surely never forget is from a friend and longtime head of the Berklee College of Music, Roger Brown. Quote, "I was teaching in a small village in Kenya in 1979 when I came across a tattered version of your book," he told me. "I read it on a mountain by moonlight, and it changed the course of my life." I'm still smiling. When anyone tells me of the book's effect on them, I always have to blurt out, "Yeah, me too." Diet for a Small Planet started as a one-page handout when I was 26, and it has profoundly shaped my life's quest. Now, in its 50th anniversary, I strive to capture key lessons that help me to this day, and that I hope will help you in these challenging times. Challenging doesn't quite do it. Over the past few years, we have been battling the fiercest storm of my lifetime. Years of attacks on the integrity of our democracy, leading to the first ever citizens' assault on the Capitol, a pandemic deemed the worst in a century, and murders by police that have fueled the Black Lives Matter movement, furthering, we can hope, our nation's long-delayed reckoning with systemic racism. At the same time, our climate crisis nears a tipping point that will drastically hasten destruction. And what first shocked me into action, hunger amid plenty, has gotten worse in recent years, even though the world's food supply offers 1/5 more calories for each of us than it did 50 years ago. Here at home, hunger is also rising. But in a mighty storm, sometimes the biggest tree comes crashing down, and for the first time, we can see its roots. Now is such a storm. So how do we grasp the roots and use what we discover to pull ourselves back from catastrophe and guide us toward life itself? Excuse me. The great news here is that millions in the United States and many more around the world are grasping the root causes of our intertwined crises and remaking their lives in ways aligned with what humans and natures need to thrive. 50 years ago, my youthful aha was that food has special power, as every day our very personal food choices connect us to each other and to all of nature. shock in discovering the needlessness of hunger triggered in me new ways of seeing what's profoundly amiss in our world and even our power to fix it. Back then, I had no idea how urgent my message would soon become. Driven by tightening corporate power over our democracy, harms from meat-centered agriculture and diets have continued to mount, damaging human health, the natural world, and the climate. And now the ultimate harm. We have destroyed so many species, largely in feeding ourselves, that we face the sixth great extinction of life on Earth. To avoid planetary disaster, warns natural historian David Attenborough, we must allow the reflourishing of life by greatly reducing the land area we farm. And, quote, quickly and the most effective way is to change our diet, end quote. Moving beyond the vast inefficiency of meat-centered eating and choosing plant-centered diets, he projects, would cut in half the land use and still produce plenty of food for all. Now, with vastly more at stake than when my own eyes first opened, it's critical to grasp how we got here. So let's go for those roots. Over the 50 years since I sat in the UC Berkeley Library pondering the root causes of hunger, I've tried to keep digging into the question beneath the question to help me grasp why we humans have messed up so badly. And here's the deepest question my digging has turned up so far. Why are we together creating a world that as individuals none of us would choose? After all, I've never met anyone who gets up in the morning vowing to make another child starve or to turn up the planet's temperature. In the 20th anniversary edition of this book, I introduced the power of ideas to explain what seems inexplicable. I invite you to read my introduction to that edition directly following this one. Today, I express the root challenge this way. While seeing is believing is a common expression, for our species, the reverse is often true. Believing is seeing. Or, as Albert Einstein put it more directly, it is theory which decides what we can observe. In other words, our internalized filters can blind us to solutions right in front of our noses, requiring precisely the constant struggle George Orwell calls to us in that opening quote. One filter above all blocks us from solutions, a belief that life is still made out of parts, when in truth all life is connected. I can see in my mind's eye the twinkly grin of the late German physicist Hans-Peter Dürr, who a decade ago laid it out to me simply. Frankie, in life there are no parts, only participants. Got it, Hans-Peter, and I've never forgotten. And it is the core truth of our being. The book is the 50th anniversary edition of Diet for a Small Planet by Frances Moore Lappé.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And happy Tuesday. Excuse me. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. We got a lot to talk about today. Is the Republican Party now in promoting the business of tracking women? And when I say business, I mean business. We will literally, as in business. We'll get to that in just a moment. Also, are you surprised that the Law and Order Party, the Republican Party, Richard Nixon famously proclaimed the Republican Party, the party of law and order, that they're now embracing lawlessness? We'll get into that too. Lindsey Graham and Fox News, and it's getting wild out there. In the second hour of our program, the horrific consequences of the merging of church and state are here. It's sort of a part two of what will be my rant in about 2 minutes here on this hour of the program. And also a geeky science. Is it true that you sleep better with CBD? Fascinating stuff published just today in the New York Times. I'll tell you about that. And also in the second hour, we have a crazy alert for you. Alex Jones insists the Democrats are staging mass shootings and poisonings running up to the November election. Yes. Maybe I should do a piece on the radio where I instruct people on how to poison. No, I shouldn't even go there. Just to make Alex crazy. But see, that's the thing. You can't make somebody crazy who's already crazy. So Anyway, that's going to be our Crazy Alert in the second hour. And also, Crazy Alert Part 2, how far can you push religious logic before it destroys you? Franklin Graham is at it. I'll tell you about that in the second hour of the program. In the third hour of our program, an old colleague of mine, Ben Dixon, is writing on Christian nationalism, the religion of white supremacy, literally the religion grounded in white supremacy itself. I'll tell you about that. And crisis level flooding is closer than you think. And still rarely do we hear the phrase climate change in the news, although it's starting to appear more and more. And also, I'm wondering if, Pakistan, for example, should have the right to sue American fossil fuel companies. But we'll get into that in the third hour of the program. I want to start out with today's rant from HartmannReport.com. It's titled, "Is the Republican Party Now in the Business of Tracking Women?" And it is actually, lest you be confused, a big business. There are data companies around the country that sell your information gathered off the internet. You know, when you walk around with your cell phone, there are apps on your cell phone, and in some case, the operating system itself. In the case of the Android phones, which is Google essentially. Google is one of the largest data acquiring companies in the world, if not the single largest, that literally are tracking everything you do, where you go, what you say, or not what you say, but where you go. If you're wearing something like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or any of these devices that can monitor your blood pressure rate or your heartbeat rate rather. They can even tell, okay, now he's asleep, now he's having sex, now he's out walking, now he's exercising, now, all of that information is literally being aggregated about all of us, including where we are. And it's gotten to the point where there are companies selling information, and this was kind of a sting operation that was done by a news organization recently, that then led to the Federal Trade Commission going after a company called Kochava, which is denying that they have any, that they're doing anything bad in this. But the FTC is alleging that they are selling data that can literally track a single woman going to an abortion clinic, from the abortion clinic to her home to identify her. And then once you've identified her, of course, you can find out what she's searched on the internet. If she's using a public email service, what she's corresponding about in her email, all kinds of things. And this information is now publicly available and for sale. So if you're some guy in Texas where you can make a $10,000 bounty just by identifying a woman and her friends who got an abortion and her friends helped her, you can make $10,000 per person, per lawsuit. I don't believe in Texas you can sue the woman herself, but you could sue her mother or her spouse or her friend who drives her to the clinic or the person who takes her to the airport or whatever it may be. And so we've got a whole bounty hunter industry going after women. Texas now has legislation pending that'll raise that bounty from $10,000 to $100,000, really putting the crosshairs on women in the United States. And multiple other states are looking at repeating Texas's bounty program, doing that same thing. And, this is very problematic. The other part of it, though, is a much bigger operation. These are absolutely huge. There's these so-called crisis pregnancy centers that advertise themselves, and they do so aggressively. They've got big bucks, these centers. They're literally receiving tens of millions of dollars in state tax money from Republican-controlled states, and they do aggressive fundraising. And these crisis pregnancy centers look like doctor's offices. They go out of their way to look like doctor's offices. They advertise as if they're doctor's offices. You walk in, you would swear you were in the waiting room of a doctor's office, right down to the medical magazines on the tabletops. And typically what they offer are pregnancy tests, which, you can buy at the drugstore. But, they say, hey, we'll verify your pregnancy. Come on in. And it's just a regular urine test, literally like the ones you buy in the drugstore. And they advertise ultrasounds, about half of them in the country. There's several thousand of these in the United States. About half of them offer ultrasounds. But the ultrasounds they offer are, quote, for entertainment purposes only. In other words, this is not an actual medical diagnostic tool. Unlike surgery, for example. I mean, if you were to say to your friend, hey, come on over to my house, I've got a scalpel, I can, cut you open and take out your appendix, you'd be causing some real problems for yourself. That's regulated, right? Not the scalpel itself, but the use of it. On the other hand, if you were to buy an ultrasound machine, you could tell everybody in your neighborhood, come on over and I'll scan your pancreas, I'll check out your liver. As long as you're not making medical claims about it, it's for entertainment purposes only. And the reason that they're doing this, in addition to adding to their credibility and also, hoping to get an image that they can show to the woman saying, that's your baby, isn't it cute, is that by offering ultrasounds, quote, for entertainment purposes only, they are not regulated by HIPAA, the Health Privacy Act. So when women go into these centers, and they're assuming that they're in an abortion clinic or in a place that refers women out to abortion clinics, before they're even given any information, they have to fill out lengthy questionnaires that include, just a whole pile of data. Name, address, email address, ethnicity, marital status, living arrangement, education, income source, alcohol, cigarette and drug intake, medications, medical history, sexually transmitted disease history, name of the referring person or organization, pregnancy symptoms, pregnancy history, medical testing information, and even ultrasound photos. All of that stuff, they have to fill this out before they can even talk to the person who's going to say, God doesn't want you to abort that baby. And what happens to that information? 2,700 of these crisis pregnancy centers are all tied into one giant company, and they've got this massive database that they're compiling on every single one of these women, number one. There's about a half a dozen, there's a little short of a half a dozen of these large networks of these things, of these crisis pregnancy centers. So they're gathering all this information. Some of them say right in their privacy notices that information may be shared with law enforcement. So if that woman is, in a state where it's illegal to get an abortion and they go to it's illegal to get an abortion in Texas right now. There are still hundreds of crisis pregnancy centers operating in Texas. So women are walking in thinking that they're going to get a referral to either they're unfamiliar with the changes in the law, many people are, or they're assuming that because it's illegal in Texas, they're going to get a referral and maybe an airplane ticket to Illinois or something. But now that these centers have their information, they can turn it over to the police, they can sell it to bounty hunters. Now, there's no evidence yet so far that crisis pregnancy centers are selling this information like the data brokers are. But they some of them explicitly say, we will share this information with law enforcement if we're asked to. So this is a massive scam, snaring literally tens of thousands of women every single day, and girls, every single day across the United States. And then the main use that they put to this information is they hand it off to the local church that is, or parish or whatever it's called. Many of them are supported by the Catholic Church or Catholic organizations. They hand it off to local preachers and lay counselors who just start relentlessly calling these pregnant women, in some cases multiple times a day, trying to talk them out of getting an abortion or warning them about the dire consequences. And the Supreme Court in 2018 ruled that it is perfectly legal for these crisis pregnancy centers to lie to women about the consequences of abortion and the consequences of pregnancy. So they can literally say, oh, it's much safer for you to carry this baby to term than to get an abortion, which is a lie. They can say, if you get an abortion, you'll never be able to get pregnant again, which is a lie. They can say, if you get an abortion, you're more likely to get breast cancer, which is a lie. These are all documented lies that have come out of these crisis pregnancy centers. And they just harass these women to no end. And the GOP is all in on this. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, just last month, introduced legislation into the Senate along with Senator Mike Lee and 17 Republicans to declare election week, the week of November 8th of this year, quote, National Pregnancy Center Week. Isn't that great? Republican attorney generals across the United States, led by Ken Paxton in Texas, Virginia's Jason Myers, and Kentucky's Daniel Cameron, these are all attorneys general, are demanding that when women search online for pregnancy information, they be immediately directed to websites of local crisis pregnancy centers. They're making this demand of Google itself. They're threatening Google. And, essentially, if you do not, they wrote to Google, we must avail ourselves of all lawful and appropriate means of protecting the rights of our constituents and upholding freedom of religion for all Americans. And over in the House, Republicans have introduced legislation that would allow crisis pregnancy centers to sue and recover a minimum of $20,000 from anybody who attacks them, like I'm doing right now.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I mean, this is amazing. If the Republicans get power in the United States, get ready. Handmaiden's Tale? That's almost an instruction manual. And welcome back. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, this is sort of a call to action for anyone, especially in California, but anyone anywhere, that thinks that fission nuclear power is a bad idea to continue. There's an emergency press conference going on today at noon Pacific time about a sort of an end-run move with the legislature to keep the reactors in Diablo Canyon going past their scheduled decommission date.
This, by the way, is their second scheduled decommission date, if my memory serves me, perhaps their third.
Of course, the ratepayers of California are going to end up paying for it. And especially, given what's happening in Zaporizhzhia right now, maybe we should have learned our lesson already and decided that it just wasn't nice to be breeding plutonium in factories all over here and yon when we don't even have a disposal solution for the waste that we make. At any rate, the measure in question is called Senate Bill 846, and it would give PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, a forgivable loan. That means, in my language, a gift of $1.4 billion plus another $100 million in fixed annual operating costs just to keep these plants open. The excuse they're making is that, well, we got to have cover the shortages when, while we're bringing the renewable sources online.
Right.
But in fact, these reactors have been down 40% of the days already, so they're not a very reliable backup source. So I'm asking everyone in California to call your assemblyman and your state senator, ask them to vote no on Senate Bill 846. And that's essentially what I wanted to say today. And also, I wanted to ask you to promise us all that you will not, in future, step out of a perfectly useful airplane before the seatbelt light is off.
I did that when I was 19, which is what Mike is referring to. It's the genesis of the surgery that I had last week. I promise, Mike.
Okay.
Ain't no way I'm going skydiving again. I did it 3 times before I broke my back. But by the way, back to nuclear power. I think that the thing that is going to nuclear power is kind of in a crisis right now, and I think the thing that is going to really create the crisis for it is what we're seeing in literally all over the world right now, is that because nuclear power plants require continuous cooling, and that cooling requires cold water, they are typically built on the ocean like San Onofre is, or on rivers. The ones by the ocean are facing a crisis if sea level rise happens. The ones on the rivers are facing a crisis because the rivers are drying up. And in fact, several nuclear power plants in China have already been shut down. There's at least one in Germany, I believe, that is running at half power. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I don't have the article in front of me, but I think there's 1 or 2 of them in France that have also had to cut back because there's just not enough water to cool them.
If I said San Onofre, that was an error. It's Diablo Canyon.
Oh, Diablo Canyon. I may have just heard you wrong, but yeah, that's also on the ocean, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
right on an earthquake quilt, too.
Yeah, brilliant. Another brilliant thing. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you.
Okay.
And I appreciate the heads up. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Back in 1981, the first year of the Reagan presidency, one of our two senators from Oregon here, Mark Hatfield, wrote an op-ed for the Oregon Territory newspaper about the new right, about this whole movement that had seized the Republican Party. And in it, he called them out for escalating nuclear arms, for opposing the Equal Rights Amendment, for opposing abortion, for supporting school prayer, and for their argument that if you weren't on their side, you were not patriotic. He also goes into a long rant about how they're exploiting religion for political purposes, and he thinks it's damaging Christianity as well as America. And then finally he says, finally, persistent threats of racism lie directly below the surface of new right ideology. And then he goes into this whole rant about that. It's really extraordinary how, what Reagan was doing is coming back into vogue. I got a whole video about the whole thing over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back, 24 minutes past the hour. Topic 2 here for hour 1. Are you surprised by this, that the Law and Order Party, so proclaimed back in the, as I recall, in the 72 re-election campaign, might have been 68 even, that Richard Nixon, of course he was back then talking about those damn hippies who are out protesting the war, and those black people who are burning down our cities, to kind of paraphrase Nixon. The party that has spent the last, 60 years or so? 70 years? 60 years, more or less, I guess. Complaining that when white cops kill unarmed black people, and in response, black people take to the streets, and occasionally that ends up, with the city being lit up. And there was protests in the streets, who have been literally complaining about protesters in the streets around the murder of black people. Republicans have been complaining about this for years, calling it lawlessness and riots in the cities. And I mean, this is all over Fox News right now. I can't tweet about anything that has to do with Republican lawlessness without getting tweets back from right-wingers going, yeah, but 30 people died and the black people rioted all over America in 2020 and turned our cities into hellholes. All this kind of crap, right? So now that party that has been spewing this, largely BS, by the way, most over 95% of all the BLM protests in 2020 were peaceful. But that party that has been going off on this for 60 years now is now threatening riots. Lindsey Graham, Sunday night on Fox News, came right out and said, if Donald Trump is prosecuted, there will be riots in the streets. He literally used the word riots. He didn't say demonstrations. He didn't say protests. He didn't say people will be holding signs. He said riots. This is good old Southern white boy Lindsey Graham going, yeah, us white people, we're going to show up in the streets and we're going to burn the cities down. Right. The Washington Post, the editorial board of the Washington Post, wrote an op-ed titled, Lindsey Graham's predictions of riots reads more like a threat. That's what it is. It is a naked threat. It is a threat to Merrick Garland, to the Justice Department, to Joe Biden, the Biden administration, and to the FBI and law enforcement. How dare you hold a lifelong grifter, criminal, and fascist accountable for his crimes? How dare you? We will burn down America, they're saying.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So what say you? I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Persist by Elizabeth Warren. And this is from the first chapter. I'm starting on page 13. It's kind of the end of the introduction, which is titled, You Don't Get What You Don't Fight For. She says, and the headline there, the subhead is, What do you bring to a knife fight? Elizabeth Warren writes, Nothing we do will be easy. No one with power will give it up readily. Our battles will be hard. Sometimes we'll find ourselves in a knife fight and we'll need our sharpest weapons. But more than anything, the toughest fights will demand that we bring our whole selves. We must bring energy and determination. We must bring clarity of purpose and a richer understanding of our common goals. We must bring a deep down commitment that will sustain us even when the fight looks impossibly hard. This book is not a campaign memoir. It's not a rehash of big public events. It's a book about the fight that lies ahead. It's about the plans we need, no surprise there, and it's about much more than plans. It's about the passion and commitment that underlie those plans and the human connection that will keep us in this fight until we see real change. I write knowing with absolute certainty that if we fail to make major changes, we will plunge our nation and our planet into an abyss from which we cannot escape. I also write with a deep thrum of optimism that we are in a moment when extraordinary changes are possible. Much is broken in this country. More than 74 million Americans voted to return Donald Trump to the White House, even as he left our government, our reputation, and even our faith in each other torn and ragged. In January 2021, his followers stormed the Capitol in an effort to stop the peaceful transition of power that has been a hallmark of our nation from its creation. But even in the darkest hours, I have never stopped believing in the strength of our democracy. Even when hatred has flared and hissed, I have never stopped believing in our capacity to create a better country based on the values we share. I believe right down to my toes that we can build a nation that expands opportunities, a nation that works, not just for the rich and powerful, but for everyone. As I lay sleepless under the covers on election night, I thought about why the fight for change matters so much to me. Why do federal laws and policies wake me up in the morning and keep me up at night? Why do I wade into one battle after another? Why do I get back up after a god-awful loss, ready to charge ahead again? Because for me, like the thousands of people I met during my campaign for president, this fight is personal. I bring the pieces of who I am to every battle. I'm a mother and a teacher. I'm a planner, a fighter, and a learner. And, Elizabeth Warren writes, I'm a woman. Together, these pieces furnish the foundation for everything I do. They are the lenses through which I see much of this world. They drive me to fight for millions of other people. They make me strong. The stories in this book come straight from my heart to yours. I share them in the hope that they will give spark to the battles you wage and keep you grounded in the righteous fights. And then we go to chapter 1. This is where the book kind of formally starts, titled A Mother. I first walked into a classroom as a bona fide teacher in September 1970, and by January or so, I was settling in. The butterflies I'd felt in the first few weeks were gone. I'd figured out lesson plans, figured out the supply closet, figured out parent conferences, the drop-offs and the pickups, and figured out the pecking order in the all-important teacher's coffee room. I was a first-year teacher at Riverdale Elementary School in Riverdale, New Jersey. I loved these children, and I loved this work. Finally, here I was, 21 years old, doing exactly what I wanted to be doing. I grew up in Oklahoma, the baby girl in a family of boys. Like every other girl I knew, I was sure I would go to high school, learn to drive a car, get married, and have kids. I knew the plan. Living that plan was what it meant to grow up. But I had one more part to my plan: to teach school. Since second grade, I'd wanted to be a teacher. When my teacher, Mrs. Lee, had put me in charge of extra reading practice with a handful of second graders, I was hooked. There would be no stopping me. For years, I lined up my dollies: Terry, Lee, Susie, Sammy, Tammy, Nursey, Lady, the storybook dolls, and all the rest, and taught school for hours and hours. Of course, Sammy was always the bad boy, and the storybook dolls were empty-headed, but I wasn't discouraged. I kept right on teaching. The road had been bumpy. My mother didn't want me to go to work. Just marry a man who's a good provider, she said. We didn't have money for college. College is for other people, she said. I found out a way to go to college anyway, but I got married at 19 and dropped out. I always knew you would, she said. Found a commuter college I could afford, but my husband got transferred before I could graduate. The book Persist by Elizabeth Warren. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We're back in. And welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. And picking up your phone call, Cheryl in Seattle. Hey, Cheryl, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, we're no longer in Seattle. We are now waiting for our last 1% charge on our Mustang that we are driving cross country, the electric Mach-E, and we're pulling a travel trailer. Now, you're talking about two retired women who are making this happen. And after California set their date for the moratorium on, gas vehicles, I've been reading all of this, anger and don't do it, Biden, and yada, yada, yada. But I'm here to tell you that this is absolutely, totally possible.
So tell me about your experience, Cheryl.
Well, we left Seattle, where we actually lived just outside Tacoma, and it actually took us longer to get out of Washington State because we had to learn how to adjust range mileage to actual distance mileage, how the air conditioner affects it, how the heat affects it. And now 2 weeks later, we have it down, and we will reach our destination in Boone, Boone, North Carolina, home of Appalachian State University, probably sometime tomorrow.
Wow. So tell me about your experience with charging stations. That's the thing that everybody freaks out about when they think about, buying an electric vehicle and having to take a road trip.
Well, we found that there are multiple apps. And there is one app that looks at almost every charger along all the highways. And so you plan your route that way. Mm-hmm. And we've met some of the nicest people charging. People are happy to move their cars and readjust and, to get our trailer in and everything. Mm-hmm. Some of the chargers are a pain in the butt to use. If you don't have the app, if you're down on, bars, you're in Nowheresville, Kentucky, if you have no reception, it's going to get a little trickier. So you have to learn which machines you can just use a plain credit card for instead of getting the lower price by, subscribing to that one charger. Municipalities often have low-level chargers next to their parks or near their post offices. So if you got a couple hours and you want to sit in the park and eat your lunch or do a little sightseeing, you are good to go.
Wow. Yeah. And so you've had no problems?
No problems. And then I would say all except for the RV park that had a sign that said Trump won, and here they are happy. They are happy to let us plug in and charge overnight. We get a full charge overnight because 50 amp RV charge is a level 2 charger, and so you just let them know. And most of them are like, "Oh yeah, hey, that's just great," Yeah. So it can be done, and just like not every vehicle is made for universal jobs. You know, you got your. I used to have a little Leaf with an 80-mile range. It was my commuter car, and that's all it was good for. But it was great for that.
Right.
So you're going to pick and choose your EV by the way you're going to use it. And we're going cross country, and we're not having a problem. You know, oh yeah, we've had glitches. Don't think it's all been merry, but it can be done, and it's going to get better with the infrastructure.
Oh yeah, with the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill. Last question, Cheryl. One of the things that I've noticed driving a rechargeable car is that in some of the recharging stations around here in rural Oregon are charging, pretty high prices for their electricity. And it still seems like it's not as much as if I was buying gasoline, but it's a whole lot more than the roughly 5 cents a kilowatt hour I think I'm paying at my house. At home I can get myself 200 miles of range, or I could. My car doesn't have that kind of range, but the bottom line is basically $6 for 200 miles. What is it costing you to refill, and how does that compare to what it would have cost if it was gasoline?
So you're right. There are some chargers that charge by the minute or by the kilowatt hour. We are now subscribed to 2 of the major chargers, and so that gives me a reduced, cost. So I can get 100 miles for about $12 to $15.
Wow. So it's comparable to gasoline, really.
Yeah, but our intent was not cost. Our intent was, this is what we have to do for the environment. Yeah, I guess we're tree huggers, we're old, and we had solar panels on our other house. We're building a house with a solar panel and a residential wind generator. It's what we need to do to make sure we leave this world a little bit better than where it's going for our children and grandchildren. Oh, man, that's just great. And I guess it actually $10 for 100 miles. That's actually a lot cheaper than gasoline for most cars. I mean, most cars average around 25 miles per gallon. You'd have to be getting over 50 miles to a gallon to make that comparable. Right. So we had solar panels on the other house and a fast charge. So we could get 320-mile charge overnight, and we never saw, even charging 2 EVs, we never saw impact on our electric bill. Yeah, I've seen absolutely no measurable impact to my electric bill of having an electric vehicle either. Cheryl, thank you. Thank you very much for the report. It's great to hear from you, and good luck on your trip. Let us know when you get to Boone, okay? All right, happy trails. Okay, thank you. Back at you, Cheryl. Norm in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Norm. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind today?
Hi. I wanted to talk about the data mining thing that we were talking about earlier. And well, I'm a pharmacist, okay? And I've told you this before, I believe. This system is already in place, okay? And it's under a conspicuous name called the Healthcare Fraud monitoring program. And in fact, what they're doing is, and there's a program called IRFS systems. And what these systems do is when you take any prescription, all prescriptions, I don't care what it is already hooked up to the Bureau of Justice and through the PDMP program. All of them. Don't people think they're narcotics, but every one of them is. And so what this company, there's a company called Qualerant, that what Qualerant does is take this data and it compiles it, and it's designed so that the doctors who prescribe more controlled medications are monitored, okay? And it does 2 things. It monitors the amount of prescriptions they're writing, and it monitors their personal assets, okay? So... Personal assets? Yes, right. Whoa. It monitors their assets. The doctor's assets. So they're looking at doctors who are making $1 million on the side selling Oxy. Well, no. I mean, that's the rationalization, right? I mean, that's not how it works, but that's the rationalization. Right. That's the rationalization. So the system is like I said, it's already, and this Qualerant then takes this information and gives it to the Bureau of Justice, who they then formulate and come up with all kind of wonderful things. Yeah. You can find this document, and so Qualerant Corporation, is the company. So it's already in place, and it's part of the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Studies. Now, if you want information, I can send this to you. But we, a group of doctors, have been trying to get this information from the federal government. They filed a lawsuit or an FOI in the United States District Court, Washington, D.C., before Judge Catelli.
Yeah. I think this information, Norm, is probably already available. I was surprised when I checked in for my surgery last week to discover that the hospital had a list of every prescription drug I'd been prescribed in the last several years, including ones that I didn't get from my regular physician. One that I got years ago, it was just a sleeping pill when I was traveling to Europe, so I could catch up with the time zones, and that's showing up on my medical record in the hospital. I'm like, where did this come from? This is years old, and it's a completely different doctor, and it's everything. I mean, it's got nothing to do with what's going on. And they're like, "Are you still taking these sleeping?" No, I haven't taken those in years. It's like,
years, right? And so what happens is, if you can do that kind of information, well, what's wrong with you? It's easy. Just type in.
Sure. Women who have positive pregnancy tests, or women who use an app that monitors their periods, and the app suggests that they might be pregnant, or women who are wearing smartwatches or Fitbits or whatever that might monitor body temperature that could indicate time of menstruation and they miss their period.
Right, Mr. Perry. Yeah, all that's in there.
I mean, the whole rhythm method is based on taking your temperature every day, and some people are wearing devices that do that. Norm, I'm with you. Hey, this is a scary, brave new world. That's why I wrote the book, The Hidden History of Big Brother in America. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. 44 minutes past the hour. And welcome back, John in Long Beach, Mississippi. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Thank you very much for taking my call, and I hope you get well and you get better.
Thank you.
I hope that. I'm calling because I kind of looked at the system. I'm thinking to myself, with these abortion laws and with the cracking and the fuel problems that we're having, and with the fossil fuels and all the problems that you're looking at. Well, let's be honest about this. This all starts from the very get-go. We start our schools and we're institutionalized from the very beginning to become a caste system. You start out as an A student
based on intellectual capability. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, more than that. It's not only that. Let me finish. Now, you start out in kindergarten and right through college, and you're getting graded according to your ability and the way in which you were able to conform to this.
Well, at least in theory, what they found is that kids of absolutely measurable equal capacity of different races tend to get graded differently by teachers who believe that they have no bias whatsoever. I mean, these studies have been replicated literally dozens of times over the last 50 years. That teachers will grade black kids who are identically well-informed and intellectual, to white kids as poorer students than white kids.
Yeah, well, when I'm looking at this here, I'm not thinking in terms of the fact that genetics has anything to do with it.
So what's the point you're trying to make, John? Where are you going with this?
My point is when you have a system that's set up as a punitive system and not a corrective system, not only in school but in prisons and everything else, the end result is going to be a negative one, and you can entertain the reasons for it, but unless, of course, we start addressing these problems and taking on the people who have the power that can change it, such as taking dark money out of our political system, let's say, we're gonna have these problems. We gotta find solutions, and by repeating ourselves over and over and getting the same results, well, as Einstein said, it's insane, and I believe it is.
So what's your solution?
I just gave you one answer. Take money out of our political system. Don't let people become lobbyists.
Yeah. No, I'm completely with you. That seems like a very rational first step. John, thank you for that. Melissa in Oaks Bluff, Alabama. Hey, Melissa, what's on your mind?
Yo, Tom. We love you.
Thank you.
We love you. I was telling the lady that I am going to try to vote for the first time in my 60-year-old life, and I can walk to the poll barefoot from here if I have to.
Good. Good on you. That's great, Melissa.
Okay. I'm just going to leave it at that. I love you. Bye.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Our shortest call of the day. Actually, Rachel, I'm going to put you back on hold because I just looked up and I only have 30 seconds. So hang on, and I'll pick you up on the other side of the break. But that was sweet. I'm not sure which camera I'm on. There we go. I did want to share with you, by the way, The Writing, this newsletter, The Writing, THERIGHTING. The top story in the right-wing press today, right now, is from Liberty Loft, and it's titled The Role of Weed in America's Decline. Are we back to this? Nixon's war on drugs? Oh, yeah. But back then it was like pick on the hippies. Now it's like pick on the old people who are using pot to get to sleep. It's crazy. We'll be right back with more of your calls right after this. Stick around. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. Well, it will be in 30 seconds. Ziggy in Oneonta, New York. Hey, Ziggy, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Mr. Suspender Man?
I'm getting better day by day. I do have to buy. This is the only pair of suspenders I have. I've got to get some that are a little more colorful because I have a feeling I'm going to be wearing them for a few weeks. But all good.
Well, put on a blue bow tie also, and it'll make it perfect. All right.
Okay.
Hey, I got a call to action also. You have 2 days left if you want to contact the government and tell them what you think about Medicare, Medicaid, and Medicare Advantage. After that, they close the ability to do that.
Comment period?
And yes.
So how do you find this, Ziggy?
Okay, you can go to my website. I've shortened the URL. It's just easier. It's endbribes.com.
Okay.
And go to the very bottom, and there's the link for that.
Okay, endbribes.com, and that'll get you to a hot, I'm guessing it's a government hot link. It's going to be a fairly complex link, and it'll take you right to it. Ziggy, you're performing a marvelous public service. How goes the T-shirt and progressive T-shirts and progressive bumper stickers?
Going great, and I just wanted to let you know I came up with buttons, and it seems to be very good for people. They're less expensive. You can put more information on them, and people like them. And let me tell you a quick story. Yesterday I was in the supermarket, and a big guy that kind of looks like me came over towards me, and I was thinking, oh, no, I'm going to have a MAGA conversation. And he goes, I love your T-shirt. It's great. And I said, well, thanks. And I gave him my button. I said, here's my blue button for you. And, it works. If we just get the word out, there's a lot of people who want this and need this and want to do democracy, and I think it's growing.
And you can find it at endbribes.com. What was the T-shirt you were wearing, Ziggy?
Oh, it was, I think it said, democracy is the solution.
Great.
Which I got from you guys. And also, I'll mention to people, if they got any ideas, my email address is there. Send it to me. A lot of people send me ideas, and I put things together for them. And it's, how we get the word out.
There you go. So if you'd like to see a bumper sticker or a T-shirt or a button made, get over to endbribes.com. Ziggy, thank you. Good luck with you. Good talking to you. Marcus in Chicago. Hey, Marcus, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
I'm going a bit off topic today.
Okay.
But I haven't heard this mentioned, and maybe it's come up on your show a time or two. I don't know. But correct me if I'm wrong. One of the reasons the Supreme Court ended abortion was because, if I'm not mistaken, they said it wasn't a part of the Constitution.
That's correct. They said that there is no part of the Constitution that protects abortion. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. This qualified immunity that wasn't legislated on, that was just given to the police on behalf of the Supreme Court.
Right. Yeah.
Is that in the Constitution?
No. There's no place in the Constitution that says that the police can wail on you without consequence. No.
My point is this. Why aren't our congressmen bringing that point to light? And I'd like, if whenever the next congressman you have on, a representative, if you could bring that question, present that question to them.
Well, that's one of literally thousands, Marcus, of things that we have come to acknowledge as rights these days. You know, that you will not find in the Constitution. Maybe I should say hundreds, given that it's Supreme Court cases I'm talking about. But you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, and it's a wrong that should be righted. Marcus, thank you. That was brilliant. Thank you. Don in Milwaukee, Oregon. Hey, Don, what's up?
Well, today's the start of school, and an idea who's come and gone. School, in my opinion, has got to be going year-round. Teachers get paid once a week. We've got to get children out of the classroom and involved in stuff in their community, especially if they live in the state capital, and helping with and learning civics.
Yeah. I agree with you. I agree with you. And I think that the way that they should organize it is they should say, yeah, school is going to go year-round, and just like in the workplace, students can take up to 2 weeks off. All they have to do is give at least a month's advance notice so the teachers can work lesson plans for them around it so they don't fall behind. And you change your number of days necessary to get federal funding and all that kind of stuff to accommodate that. But the days that, I mean, in the late 1890s, which is when public schools became a thing in the United States. You know, Horace Mann started his sales pitch in the 1870s, and by the 1890s, it was, state after state was starting to pick it up. Massachusetts was the first in the late 1880s. Back then, literally, 70% of Americans were farmers. And so, suspending school for the summer so the kids could help bring in the crops was just like, that's what everybody did.
Exactly.
Now, 2% of Americans are farmers. Right, and now 2% of Americans are farmers, and it just makes no sense. I'm with you.
Right. I think schools should ramp up starting springtime, and then you get extra long, what would normally be 3 days, you'd get more time. Yeah. And at this time of year, it'd be phasing out, and they would be involved more with extra
weekend holidays and things like that. Yeah, Don, I'm with you. I'm done. I need to move along. I want to get Rachel in here, and I bowled her up and then forgot. Rachel, my apologies. In Needham, Massachusetts, you're back on the air.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Yeah, that's fine. I was doing some research while I was on hold. I'm calling because of your earlier talk regarding those pregnancy crisis centers. Mm-hmm. And while I was listening, I Googled in Massachusetts, because I heard you say that they were only in Republican, or mostly in Republican.
No, in the Republican states, they're funded by the government itself. For example, there's 11 times more pregnancy crisis centers in Minnesota than there are abortion clinics. And the reason why is because when Republicans controlled the state, they passed legislation to pour millions of dollars into these right-wing religious organizations.
Okay, well, we have a bunch of them here in Massachusetts. I counted anywhere from 10 to 15, and then there's a few in New Hampshire and one in Rhode Island. Yep. And funny thing that connects with this, back in 2020 during the election cycle, registry of probate here in Massachusetts, there are 3 women and 2 men. So I researched all of them, right? And it looked like all 3 women had something to do with either infertility or juvenile, because I think they're all 3 of them are lawyers, or at least 2 of them are. And
the people running these places?
Well, no, the people that were running for office.
Oh, I see.
And they all had connections, and I thought it was really strange. So I didn't want to, and this is before I learned anything about these crisis centers, and I'm like, I'm not going to vote for any of them because I don't want that kind of person here. Right. So I ended up voting for one of the guys. So I just think it's really interesting that you're talking about these crisis centers.
Yeah, so you've got political candidates who are hooking themselves up with these groups. True, that's amazing. Rachel, thank you. Thank you for that. That was well worth waiting for. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Hannah Arendt's book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. And I've, known about this book, read little pieces of it for decades. I mean, it's the classic work on totalitarianism. It's long and there's a lot of words in it, but for this moment, Elliot Lustig was tweeting recently about Donald Trump. This is back when Donald Trump was talking about 3 to 5 million illegal immigrants voting, right? And he said, Hannah Arendt, in her book, The Origin of Totalitarianism, provides a helpful guide for interpreting the language of fascists. She noted how decent liberals of 1930s Germany would fact-check the Nazis' bizarre claims about things like Jews as if they were meant to be factual. What they failed to understand, Arendt suggests, is that the Nazi Jew-hating was not a statement of fact, but a declaration of intent. So when someone would blame the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I, naive people would counter by saying, there's no evidence of that. What the Nazis were doing was not describing what was true, but what would have to be true in order to justify what they planned to do next. So did 3 million illegals cast vote in the election? Clearly not. But fact-checking is just a way of playing along with their game. What Trump is saying is not that 3 million illegals voted. What he's saying is, I'm going to steal the voting rights of millions of Americans. So that's kind of a contemporary frame for this book. So let's read from the book itself. Here, this is from page 348. And she's talking about totalitarian movements and how they use propaganda, how they communicate with the public, and the difference between terror and propaganda, the kind of terror that they can inculcate by just kind of randomly arresting people. Pretty much everybody's committed some kind of crime at some point, right? Arresting people, and on the one hand, that's the terror, or convincing the people. These totalitarian movements use socialism and racism by emptying them of their utilitarian content, the interests of a class or a nation. The form of infallible protection in which these concepts were presented has become more important than their content. The chief qualification of a mass leader has become unending infallibility. He can never admit an error. The assumption of infallibility, moreover, is based not so much on superior intelligence as on the correct interpretation of the essentially reliable forces in history and nature, forces which neither defeat nor ruin, and prove wrong because they're bound to assert themselves in the long run. Mass leaders in power have one concern which overrides all utilitarian consideration: to make their predictions come true. The Nazis did not hesitate to use, at the end of the war, the concentrated force of their still intact organization to bring about as complete a destruction of Germany as possible, in order to make true their prediction that the German people would be ruined in case of defeat. The propaganda effect of infallibility, the striking success of posing as a mere interpreting agent of predictable forces, has encouraged in totalitarian dictators the habit of announcing their political intentions in the form of prophecy. The most famous example is Hitler's announcement to the German Reichstag in January 1939, quote, "I want today once again to make a prophecy. In case the Jewish financiers succeed one more in hurling the people into a world war, the result will be the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe." End of quote. Translated into non-totalitarian language, this means, I intend to make war and I intend to kill the Jews of Europe. Similarly, Stalin, in the great speech before the Central Committee of the Communist Party in 1930, in which he prepared the physical liquidation of intra-party right and left deviationists, described them as representatives of dying classes. This definition not only gave the argument its specific sharpness, but also announced in totalitarian style the physical destruction of those whose dying out had just been prophesied. In both instances, the same objective is accomplished. The liquidation is fitted into a historical process in which man not only suffers, or does or suffers what, according to some immutable law, is bound to happen anyway. As soon as the execution of the victims has been carried out, the prophecy becomes a retrospective alibi. Nothing happened but what has already been predicted. It does not matter whether the laws of history spell the doom of the classes and their representatives, or whether the laws of nature exterminate all those elements, democracies, Jews, Eastern subhumans, the Untermenschen, or the incurably sick. They are not fit to live anyway. Incidentally, Hitler, too, spoke of dying classes that ought to be, quote, eliminated without much ado, end quote. This method, like other totalitarian propaganda methods, is foolproof only after the movements have seized power. Then all debate about the truth or falsity of a totalitarian dictator's prediction is as weird as arguing with a potential murderer about whether his future victim is dead or alive, since by killing the person in question, the murderer can provide prompt proof of the correctness of his statement. The only valid argument under such conditions is promptly to rescue the person whose death has been predicted. Before mass leaders seize the power to fit reality to their lies, their propaganda is marked by its extreme contempt for facts as such, for, in their opinion, fact depends entirely on the power of the man who can fabricate it. The assertion that the Moscow subway is the only one in the world is a lie only so long as the Bolsheviks have not the power to destroy all the others. In other words, the method of infallible prediction, more than any other totalitarian propaganda device, works. In the book, Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. Last week, I published a piece while Jefferson was filling in for me every day of the week, even though I was, kind of flat on my back and stoned. Mostly what I was doing was finding articles that I had written a year or two ago that I thought really still had a lot of juice to them, and then just updating them, which I could kind of do in my hazy condition. And although this one, actually I spent a couple of days on slowly working on it. It was titled The Horrific Consequences of the GOP Merging Church and State Are Here. It was based on one I'd written back in 2004 when Antonin Scalia gave a speech at the oldest Orthodox Jewish synagogue in America. And at that speech, Antonin Scalia, in fact, I published this in Common Dreams back in 2004, but I completely reinvented it for this piece. But back then in that speech, Antonin Scalia said that the reason why the Holocaust happened in Germany was because Hitler perpetuated the separation of church and state. His actual quote was, quote, I'll quote from the Associated Press, which says it kind of third person. In the synagogue that is home to America's oldest Jewish congregation, Scalia noted that in Europe, religion-neutral leaders almost never publicly use the word God. But in Scalia's mind, the really big problem wasn't that political leaders weren't sufficiently religious. It was that religious leaders weren't dictating laws and the application of them. Did it turn out, Scalia asked rhetorically, by reason of the separation of church and state, the Jews were safer in Europe than they were in the United States of America? He then answered himself saying, I don't think so. So I went back and I pulled that piece out of that article, and then I built this whole brand new article around it. Pointing out that Scalia was born in 1936. He was a child when Auschwitz was liberated, when World War II ended. He had to have seen the newsreels. If he didn't, his son is a very politically active Catholic priest. He was at Amy Coney Barrett's swearing-in ceremony, for example. I believe his name is John Scalia. And Scalia should have known better. Not only did Hitler not perpetuate the separation of church and state, which was never in the German Constitution, but was sort of de facto because of, I lived in Germany for a year. Germany is a kind of 50-50 country, half Catholic, half Protestant. I mean, the Protestant Reformation arguably started there. In fact, it started just down the road from where I lived in Coburg, where Martin Luther nailed his, 72 theses or whatever it was, his arguments against the church to the wall of the door, to the front door of that church. And I've been to that church where Luther did that. And, but it was still 50-50. But in 1936, Germany changed their constitution to make the entire country officially Protestant. And Hitler elevated a Protestant, a Lutheran pastor to the role of Reichs Archbishop. In fact, they created this role in the new German Constitution that Hitler put in place in 1936. So not only was church and state not separated, as Scalia was arguing back during the day, but church and state were fully merged in Germany. And instead of the separation of church and state facilitating the Holocaust, I think you could build a really strong case that the merger of church and state in Germany in the 1930s led directly to the Holocaust, because it provided a religious rationalization. It gave good people the opportunity to say, well, it's okay. I mean, Bishop Mueller never spoke out about the concentration camps or the death camps or any of this stuff. And in fact, right after the war ended, he committed suicide. And I think if I was him, I probably would have too. Can you imagine the burden that man must have been carrying, being the Reichsbishop? But there's all these pictures. I mean, just go to Google or DuckDuckGo and type in Catholic bishops Nazi salute, and then look at the images. I mean, there's literally thousands of images of large numbers of Catholic bishops, or excuse me, they weren't Catholic then; they were Protestant. In fact, take out the word Catholic. And for those of you who think I'm anti-Catholic, no, it was a slip. I'm sorry, and not a Freudian one. But I'm just used to attaching that word to bishop. But all these pictures of these Lutheran bishops and the clergy across Germany giving the Nazi salute and Heil Hitlerin and hanging out with Himmler and hanging out with all these other guys. James Madison, back on July 10th, 1822, wrote a letter to a friend of his, Edward Livingston. And in that, he was talking about this running debate that he had been having with Thomas Jefferson for the better part of their lives, for the better part of, at that point, probably 40 years. And he would have been in his 60s by then, I think. And Madison was concerned that if the churches ever got a hold of state money, of federal money, it would corrupt the churches. And I think we can definitely see this again, like with these crisis pregnancy centers that are funded with state money in state after state all across the country. That if religion ever started getting state money, it would corrupt religion. And Madison was a good Christian. He was a church-going Christian. I shouldn't say good necessarily. He was also a slaveholder, but he believed that he was a Christian. He thought of himself as a believer. Jefferson, also a slaveholder, was not a Christian. Came right out and said it. The law in Virginia required you to be a member of a church in order to run for public office. And so when Jefferson wanted to become a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses, this is all before the American Revolution, he joined a local church and in fact became fairly active in that church for a short while. And it's something that religious people love to quote. But it was because it was the law in Virginia. It was required. And but Jefferson wrote over and over and over again about how he thought that Christianity was a fraud, how the divinity of Christ was a fraud, how if priests or church leaders ever became political figures, it would destroy America. So here's Jefferson saying that if the religious people control government, we're in trouble. And here's Madison saying if government ever starts pouring money into religion, religion's in trouble. And this was Madison's July 10th, 1882 letter to Livingston. He said, "We are teaching the world the great truth, that governments do better without kings or nobles than with them. The merit will be doubled by the other great lesson, that religion flourishes in greater purity without than with the aid of government." And then he went on in that same letter to say, "I have no doubt that every new example will succeed, as every past one has done, in showing that religion and government will both exist in greater purity the less they are mixed together." And of course, it was in correspondence between Jefferson and Madison, if my recollection serves me right, that the phrase, the wall of separation between church and state, was created and or popularized. It's not literally in the Constitution. The structure for the wall between church and state is definitely in the Constitution. You've got, the Establishment Clause that says that Congress shall not establish a religion for the United States. You've got the religious test provision that says that no person running for political office shall be held to any kind of religious test by the government. And of course, in the First Amendment, you've got how would you say it, the separation of church and state, essentially that, government may not promote religion, but also government may not demote religion. It may not prevent the exercise of religion. So, there was this clear thing that says these two. And what we've seen now is that with these trigger laws, for example, going into effect now, fully 1/3 of women in the United States no longer have access to abortion services. And increasingly, women are finding it harder and harder to even get simple birth control. Florida Republican Marco Rubio finally came out. He'd been waffling and kind of, going around left and right on abortion, on the abortion issue. He is up for re-election. He's running against Val Deming down in Florida this year. And a candidate who has a good chance of beating him. And if you have the means and the inclination, to be supporting political candidates, Val Deming is one that I would put at the top of the list. But in any case, Marco Rubio finally came out and said that, when it comes to 10-year-olds getting impregnated by a relative or just the rapist down the street or whatever, his answer to that 10-year-old girl is tough luck. I mean, he didn't literally say tough luck, but in his tortured legalese, that is essentially what Marco Rubio said. So the point that I'm making with going back to Scalia back in 2004 is that this Dobbs decision did not come out of nowhere. This is the result of a project that conservatives on the Supreme Court, specifically Alito, Scalia, and Thomas, have been working on for 20 and 30 years. And now has come to fruition with the addition of these, 3 right-wing crackpots that Trump put on the court.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And it's obviously not good for our government, but it's also not good for religion. Church attendance has collapsed in the United States, and I think it's because of this. And welcome back. And let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Tom in Huntington Beach, California. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
I'm always good to hear your voice.
Thank you.
And listen to your work. I just thought I'd kind of remind people a little bit of old history about the Trump family, in that Trump's father was in the upper levels of the New York Bund before it was outlawed.
Oh, I didn't know that. I knew that his father, Fred, was arrested at a Klan rally, but I didn't know he was affiliated with the Bund. I mean, he was German, wasn't it? His father, Fred's father, emigrated from Germany when he was dodging the draft.
Yes, and the arrest was about recruiting for the KKK, and he also went to that giant riot in New York.
Right, that's where he was arrested.
KKK. Exactly. But the Bund was financed from 36 to 38 by Rudolph Hess. And since New York was the largest city in America, the bulk of the money went there. Huh. And Trump's father was one of the head people in the Bund, and he used to tell people he was Norwegian because public opinion was turning against the Germans.
Well, and also the Norwegians were the Aryans that Hitler and the Nazis held up as the example of the purest form of the Aryan race.
Exactly. The reason I'm bringing up the past
in fact, the swastika they borrowed from an old Norwegian rune. I mean, I realize it was also Hindu, but and the SS on the the SS lightning bolts, that was Norwegian rune.
Yeah, that was a rune too, but the swastika was reversed.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and that's also American Indian too.
Yep. No, that appears in pretty much every religion in the world.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. The reason I'm bringing this up isn't to bring up old history. It's to really kind of follow that old adage that the apple never falls far from the tree.
Mm-hmm. So,
go ahead, sir.
Well, finish your thought. I have a question for you, Tom.
Oh, okay. I was just going to mention that. All you got to do is really look at the time when he accused the New York Five of the rapes that they didn't commit, and they were later proven guilty, and he said they should all be
proven innocent. Yeah.
Exactly. And then when they were proven innocent, he never apologized when he took out full-page ads.
Calling for the death penalty.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're right. So, Tom, I've done a lot of digging into Donald Trump's life. I'm nowhere near, people like David K. Johnston who have become experts on this. But, I have read a lot, and I'd never, maybe I just missed it. I'd never read that Fred was associated with the New York Bund. How would I find that? What evidence do you have of that, or is there out there of that?
Well, yeah, there is, and what it is I did a week dive once, like 140 hours, just constantly, like 8 to 10 hours a day, looking and looking.
Wow, you're more obsessive than I am.
Well, I got really mad at him because I originally I'm a vet. I was a lifetime Republican, but I never got into politics. Yeah. And then when this dude came along, I said, I'll give him a chance for a year. And then I started looking real deep, and I go, this is the biggest grifter in the history of the world.
Yeah. So in other words, if I just search Fred Trump and New York Bund, I will find his associations. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and also I started in Wikipedia and went through that and started following every thread that presented, and that's how I found it.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Tom, thanks for the call. Thanks, and the information. Learn something new every day. 21 minutes past the hour. Back with more of, actually, I've got some amazing geeky science and a couple of crazy alerts for you. Pick that up, and then your calls right after this. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Back during World War I under President Wilson, we had a windfall profits tax on war profiteers, essentially, of 95% above their normal profits. You were allowed to make your normal profits, but when you started making more than that, 95% tax on that income. President Franklin Roosevelt revisited the exact same thing, windfall profits tax, during World War II, saying he didn't want this war to produce any new war millionaires. During the Korean War, Dwight Eisenhower had a windfall profits tax. During the echo of the fall of the Shah of Iran, when all the Iranian oil was taken off the marketplace and the price spiked, President Ronald Reagan imposed a windfall profits tax on the oil and gas industry to stop exploitation of that. Now we have Senator Bernie Sanders in the Senate and Ed Markey as well, along with him, and Representative Jamal Bowman in the House saying, let's do the same thing now. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. So a geeky science for the day. This is absolutely fascinating. It's in fact in today's New York Times by Rachel Rabkin-Peachman. It's titled, Does CBD Help with Insomnia? Studies, CBD has only been around for a short while, and it's the marijuana version of it has only been legal for a short while. And so we're just starting now to see the early studies, the results of the early studies coming in. And while there has yet to be one specific, definitive, large-scale, multi-year, multi-thousand-person study, because we just haven't had the time to do that, we're seeing a lot of small studies coming in suggesting that because CBD does reduce inflammation, that's not in dispute, and that may help alleviate pain, and that it does appear to calm the central nervous system, which alleviates anxiety. And not just calm the central nervous system, it can even act as an what's the phrase? Anti-epileptic, anti-spasmodic. Remember the 60 Minutes outed this back a decade ago about these children who were having seizures, and they were, taking pilgrimages to Colorado to get CBD. There was a name for it, Rachel's Tears or something like Charlotte's Tears, I think it was called, or Charlotte's Drops, because the little girl was named Charlotte. And now there's actually a pharmaceutical. There's a drug. It's an anti-epileptic medication. It's called Epidiolex, and it's CBD. Now, the problem, of course, is not knowing where you're getting it from. One of the things they point out in the article is that they tested, a couple of dozen different brands, and they found that their actual CBD levels were all over the charts. So be sure you're getting it from a reputable supplier. But they found that studies have found, I'm quoting from the New York Times now, studies have found that CBD used in combination with THC holds promise as treatment for sleep disorders like insomnia, sleep apnea, restless leg syndrome, and nightmares related to PTSD. CBD itself may indirectly help you sleep by alleviating pain and anxiety. In one case series, again reading from the New York Times, researchers looked back at the medical charts of 72 people with anxiety or sleep problems who were treated in the same clinic with 25 to 175 milligrams of CBD per day for 3 months. They found that the CBD was most helpful for anxiety. There was a weaker association with sleep. But hey, if you're less anxious, you're more likely to sleep well, or at least logic would indicate. So, our geeky science. Crazy alert. This is just nuts. Alex Jones is insisting that Democrats are going to be staging mass shootings and poisonings leading up to the election in November, which is just, September, October, November. It's like 9 weeks away now. And so here, this is what Alex Jones said yesterday on television. He said, in the next 71 days, we are going to see some very violent fireworks. I would predict racially motivated mass shootings, bombings, poisonings, attacks on power supplies being blamed on the right wing. They intend to bring in a full dictatorship in the next 71 days. Now, this raises the question in my mind, the whole being blamed on the right wing part. Is this actually a call to action to right wingers to do this? Is he hoping the right wingers will start shooting people, poisoning people, killing people in order to provoke his so-called civil war? I mean, just in time for Thanksgiving, Jones said, he said the globalists are going to overthrow America. Now, globalist, of course, is a word on the right that is synonymous with Jews. And he said these globalists have tricked Americans into thinking that there will be a leftist revolution. In fact, he said there will be a civil war. Right. This is the same kind of rhetoric that led up to January 6th. This is stuff we need to take seriously. What happens when religion goes completely around the edge? Well, part of it is the crisis pregnancy centers that we talked about in the first hour of the program. The other part I'll share with you on the other side of the break, and then I'll pick up your phone calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Crazy Alert Part 2. How far can you push religious logic before it destroys you? Coming up right after this. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Brainwashing of My Dad, How the Rise of the Right-Wing Media Changed a Father and Divided Our Nation and How We Can Fight Back by Jen Senko. This is from Chapter 6, How Talk Radio Hijacked My Dad. In 1984, Reagan was reelected in a landslide victory against liberal Democrat Walter Mondale. That year was also when everything began to change for my dad and our family. In 1984, Dad retired from his job with the federal government at age 62. Both my parents missed being near the shore, so they moved back to New Jersey and settled in Toms River, a town where there was a large retired population. Still energetic, my father got a part-time engineering job 3 or 4 days a week, necessitating a long solo commute by car. He didn't want to waste time on music while driving. He wanted to be stimulated mentally, and he discovered talk radio to keep himself company. At the time, Bob Grant was the dominant talk radio personality. Often called the conservative radio, Grant was an openly racist, sexist, far-right shock jock. On his WABC radio show, he referred to blacks and Hispanics as savages. He believed them to be inferior, and he once even called Martin Luther King Jr. a slimeball. With his combative and testy style, he was considered a pioneer of the talk radio format. Soon, Grant became my dad's commuting buddy. I didn't know Bob Grant from Joe Namath, but I did know I didn't care for his style of yelling at callers or hanging up on them if they disagreed with him. My mother was not a fan of Grant's either, and she delighted in telling me the story of how she ran into him one day. She was at the Ocean County Mall eatery, sitting at a table having lunch when she saw Grant walk in. She recognized him, and when he passed her table, she asked, "You're Bob Grant, aren't you?" He said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Oh, my husband likes you, but I don't." He had been walking away and turned to look back at my mother and gave a little laugh. She said she just sat there at the table and did not smile back. Gradually, it seemed my dad started becoming more agitated after listening to Bob Grant. Eventually, he became consistently more irritable, excitable, and easy to anger. Little did we know, a metamorphosis was beginning. Along with massive deregulation in the communications industry, there were several other factors that led to talk radio's explosion of popularity in the 1980s. The first was that music had moved from the AM dial to the high-fidelity sound of FM, and thus left a void on the AM dial. Broadcasters realized that filling that blank airspace with mainstream news wouldn't make much money. However, entertainment made money, and talk radio was entertainment at its finest, even when it masqueraded as news coverage. Human conversation didn't benefit from high-fidelity sound the way music did, so talk radio filled the void on the AM radio waves perfectly. The second contributor to talk radio's rise was the new accessibility of satellite technology, allowing anyone to broadcast a show nationally. And the third was the fact that when 1-800 numbers became available, you could have callers call in from all over the country. These factors combined to make a pretty powerful storm. The format of talk radio was, of course, not new. The format first debuted in the 1920s, continuing with Father Charles Coughlin's controversial and anti-Semitic radio broadcasts in the 1930s. Coughlin has often been referred to as the father of hate radio, and he paved the way for all that has come in his medium. Many of the most famous conservative talk radio personalities modeled themselves after the 1950s sensation Joe Pyne. His show, It's Your Nickel, consisted of Pyne debating his opinions with people calling in. Calls often culminated with him insulting the caller, to the delight of his audience. The format of talk radio evolved from there, but many of the most popular shows and hosts, including Bob Grant, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and Glenn Beck, have stuck with the confrontational tone and high-emotion interactions that these early hosts introduced. There haven't been many successful liberal talk radio hosts. Ed Schultz, Randy Rhoads, and Alan Colmes tried to make inroads, but simply failed to draw a large audience, in quotes. You may wonder why conservative talk radio programs have been so phenomenally popular while equivalent liberal shows have foundered. Aside from big money to support it, the secret seems to lie in the inflammatory approach favored by these so-called conservative hosts. Abram Brown of Forbes says of liberal talk radio shows, it's not the same thing as a Limbaugh or a Hannity. It's more general, not really railing against the system. No one's yelling, we need to get rid of the Republicans. They're the worst thing that happened in this country. But you'll hear conservative radio hosts say that about liberals on their programs. Brown makes another good point that speaks to that. Tell your audience that the mainstream media is corrupt and biased, that there's more than that there's all the more reason to turn to your conservative talk radio to get the truth. Anger is a hot commodity. Finding an enemy is even hotter. Or as Ailes might say, it's the emotions, stupid. He did not actually say that. A little-known but very chilling example of how powerfully influential radio can be is the 1994 Rwandan genocide, where an estimated 800,000 citizens were brutally murdered by their fellow citizens, the Hutus. This happened after an intense radio campaign that started in 1993 dehumanized and demonized one group, the Tutsis. Militia groups were formed, and police and soldiers joined them in the killing. Samantha Power, who later served as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, said killers often carried a machete in one hand and a transistor radio in the other hand. Dad discovers Rush Limbaugh. About a year or so after working part-time in his long commute, my dad officially retired. The book, The Brainwashing of My Dad, by Jen Senko. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. The Economic Policy Institute just came out with a great summary of what's causing inflation and what are the myths about inflation. They go through the 5 major myths, the lies. Number 1, that workers' wage growth is driving inflation. Actually, workers' wage growth is going up more slowly than inflation. It's holding inflation back. Myth number 2, that corporate profits are not the cause of inflation. Actually, more than half of the inflation that we're experiencing right now can be tracked directly to corporations ripping us off. Myth number 3, federal relief and recovery measures overheated the economy and caused inflation. If you look over the last 40 years, you see that that's very much not the case. You might be able to build a case for the Fed feeding it, but probably not. Myth number 4, removing import tariffs would be a major tool to fight inflation. Not so much. And myth number 5, investing in child care and elder care would accelerate it. Nope, not the case. There's a whole video about this over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back, 35 minutes past the hour. Joe, one story, quick story I wanted to share with you. What happens when religion goes over the top, right? I mean, we're all familiar with the religious cults, for example. There was one up here in the Pacific Northwest, I believe they were in Washington State, where a number of their children actually died because they refused them medical assistance. One of their children, maybe 2 of their children were diabetic, and they refused to give them insulin. And these children died around 7 or 8 years old because, they died of their diabetes. And several of the children died of other medical conditions, like infections that could have easily been treated. That's when religion goes from being, a nice fuzzy thing that kind of provides us with some solace during times of crisis or whatever. It goes from that into being toxic, destructive, dangerous. So here we have now Franklin Graham. I saw him on TV this morning on, I believe it was CNN, pitching his prayer scam. Call us and we'll say a prayer with you, and then we'll ask you for money. And we'll get you on our list, and we'll pester you for money for the rest of your lives. In fact, we'll ask you to put us in your will. I mean, it's a very lucrative business for Franklin Graham. He's a multi-millionaire, as was his father. Although I remember his father, Billy Graham, and I think that his father actually was, a decent man who believed what he was saying. Franklin Graham, I believe, is a con man. But anyhow, Franklin Graham tweeted yesterday, "Man has no ability to repair this damaged planet. The flaw in human nature is too great. God is our only hope." In other words, hey, you've got, millions of people dying of climate change all around the world. The oceans are going to rise. The pollution is terrible. We can't do anything about it. Just pray. Send me more money, basically, is Franklin Graham's message. Stephen Pacheco replied saying, "This is exactly why we don't want religious conservative zealots in charge of anything, because they don't take responsibility for anything." And I'd say it's even worse than that. Franklin Graham has been a climate change denier, and now he's a climate change. Well, you can't do anything about it. It's all up to God. Well, my question for Franklin Graham and his family is, if your child gets a serious bacterial infection, are you going to refuse to take him to the doctor because God will take care of him? Have we come to that in the evangelical church? It sure as hell looks like it. Forgive my obscenity there, probably the least appropriate place to use it, but in any case, you get my point. All right, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Joe in Calabasas, California. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Happy Tuesday, Tom.
Thanks. Back at you, Joe.
Yes, Tom, this is regarding to the issue that's been going around now. And the topic is, I wanted to get your educated opinion on. This is so far, the running count is 9,000 migrants being bused from Texas to the D.C. and adjacent areas, Maryland, or so forth. Yeah. My question, Tom, is there any recourse for these areas, the places that I mentioned where these migrants are being bused to? They have medical care, they have to be fed and housed and so forth. Can that cost just be, every state in the union gets federal funding, can that just be back charged to Texas? Say, fine, you want to send the migrants here, we'll take care of them, they do need help, and we'll charge for them. And,
I doubt I doubt it, and B, I get it that Greg Abbott is doing this as a stunt. He's doing it for publicity. He's running for re-election, and he's pretty freaked out because Beto O'Rourke is beating him, frankly, or very close to it. But also, I wouldn't call them migrants. The vast majority of these people are not migrants; they're refugees.
Refugees, yes.
And there's a big difference between the two. And our law treats the two very differently as well, by the way. The only reason that these people have the right to be in the United States, thus they're getting bused to D.C., is because they have been qualified as refugees rather than migrants, and we have a quota for refugees in the United States every year.
Right. Yeah. I'm sorry for misplacing that term.
No, it's all over the right-wing media. You're saying the same thing. All the Republicans are saying.
Exactly. Now, I wanted to give a short comparison. In Italia or in Italy, over many, many, many years, the same situation has occurred where the refugees come through Lampedusa, and then from Lampedusa to Italia. And Italia welcomes them with open arms because the EU gives massive funding per refugee. And that's
interesting.
Of course, in the Italy scope of things, a lot of that gets skimmed off the top, and a very, very small percentage of those fundings per each refugee. Actually, most of it goes into various people's pockets, and a little bit of it will go to the refugee. So it's a big business there.
Right. So if the federal government were to say to individual states, when you accept, legal refugees, people who have gone through the system and been released, and are awaiting a court date, adjudication, all that kind of stuff. When you take legal refugees into your state, we will provide you with additional funding. That would be a much more effective way. Well, I guess that's what you're suggesting, Joe, to basically, throw some sand in Greg Abbott's face.
Yeah, and that's really the bottom line. I don't see why the state of Texas and Abbott should be really getting away with this. This is once again just them thumbing their nose at the government. I'm just.
Yeah, that's an idea. It's an idea. It's let me recommend. Sean, do we have any members of Congress coming on this week? Yeah. Who? What day? Roe on Thursday. Oh, and Mark is going to be here tomorrow. Oh, great. We're going to have both of them this week. It's going to be a short week too. Tom, if you don't, or excuse me, Joe, if you don't mind, I would suggest that you try to call in to either Mark Pocan or Ro Khanna, and just tell Joyce I gave you a 2-call this week dispensation, and ask that same question. You could make it really tight. Greg Abbott thinks he's getting brownie points for sending refugees to New York or to D.C. Might it be possible for the federal government to provide additional funds to states when they accept, legal refugees? I
would love to plant that seed because I really hope someone in Washington's already thinking about that.
Please go for it. I don't want to abuse my position by constantly lobbying these guys on the things that are on my list, and so I try to just play referee, basically, talk show host for that hour that they're on, but. I generally don't encourage callers to call it, but this is a particularly good one. Joe, thanks a lot for the call, and good luck getting through on Thursday or on Wednesday or Thursday. Tom in Oneonta, New York. Hey, Tom, what's up? Tom in Oneonta, watching us on Free Speech TV. Going once, going twice. Joe in Parker, Colorado. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Well, I just wanted to respond to the guy that wanted teachers to work all year round.
Mm-hmm.
They expect to pay more money.
Yeah, of course. Teachers right now are paid about, the nationwide average, I believe, is 28% below what average college graduates, comparable college graduates make. And in some states, it's as much as 50% lower. In some states, obviously, then it's a little bit higher. But certainly, if you're going to ask teachers to work year-round and not take a couple months off in the summer, pay them more money. Bring them up to parity with everybody else who works full-time and has a college degree.
And
I don't mean to suggest teachers don't work full-time.
No, teachers only get paid for the days they work. That's the point I want to make.
Well, that varies from state to state.
Well,
there are some places where teachers just receive an annual salary.
Well, your contract is for X number of days. Now, where I worked, 183 days.
Okay.
Now, it didn't matter when you started or when you ended.
Uh-huh.
And if you take 2 weeks off in December, well, typically what they do is your salary is prorated over a 10-month period, and you get 10 paychecks that are equal in amount.
Right.
And if you want to get through the summertime, you better get a job or better save some money.
Yeah. I don't know how that works on a state-by-state basis, Joe. I did have a friend, this was, 20 years ago, who was a teacher in, as I recall, Vermont. And she just got a monthly salary 12 months out of the year, and that was her salary as a teacher. But, Vermont's a little tiny state, and it might have just been completely different rules, and maybe their union didn't negotiate stuff. I just don't know. But I agree with you that if we're going to ask teachers to work an extra 2 months, that we certainly need to have teacher parity with, a similar college education. And frankly, we should do that anyway. But Joe, your point is well taken. Thank you. Robert in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Hey, Roger, what's up? Robert, excuse me.
Hey, Tom. So back to your talk on school calendar. I taught at the end of the 90s in South Dakota. I realize every state's different with their calendar.
Mm-hmm.
But back then, South Dakota at least was on a 180-day calendar.
Mm-hmm.
I was a proponent back then of year-round schooling because the kids, lose stuff. You have to retrain them every year. So I figured out you could keep the 180-day calendar, just have 4 2-week breaks, spring, summer, winter, fall, keep your normal holidays, and you're still at 180 days. Problem solved.
That's not bad. That does, the reason why I was thinking that we should only have 2 or maybe 3 or 4 weeks of vacation for kids per year is because an awful lot of parents use school as essentially daycare so that they can work. And if you had 8 weeks off throughout the year, that could be problematic for, although if it was, if different school districts did it at different times, of course, then kids can't get together and go to camp and things. There are entire industries built around summer vacations, like summer camps and things. So it could be disruptive in some ways that, some, shall we say, vested interests would object to. But I like your suggestion too, Robert. I think it's a great one.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It is 46 minutes past the hour. We'll continue with your phone calls on the other side of the break. It's talk media for the rest of us here on the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm back, feeling pretty good. Glad to be with you. And we'll be back with your calls right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Joe Biden's going to be giving a talk tonight about safety in America, too. It'll be interesting to see how he positions the threat of gun violence in that. And welcome back. Ron in Clearbrook, Minnesota. Hey, Ron, thanks for watching us on Free Speech. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Dr. Speedy Recovery.
Thank you.
I'd just like to put a bug in your ear about the words retributive and restorative, and them being a basis for debate for the Democratic Party writ large going forward about that being a distinction at its core, at its root, between the two parties, and the extent to which the Republican Party has used and is using a form of punishment or retribution rather than being life-affirming or affirmative in a great many discussions going forward.
So give us a 10-second definition of retributive versus restorative.
Right. Just retribution, punishment-based rather than restorative or life-affirming based.
So are you talking about like the difference between the Norwegian penal system and ours?
Oh, sure. That not just in penal systems. Treatment of the planet, neoliberalism, liberalism, and neoconservatism. The court system. The list goes on. Religion. The list goes on and on and on. How that can be used as a distinct and basic argument between the approach of two different groups of people.
Yeah. Good one. Ron, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Great to hear from you.
All right. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Mark in Boulder, Colorado. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hey, Tom. When you mentioned the thing with Alex Jones, as far as you were wondering if it was a call to action, I think it absolutely is. And I think Lindsey Graham's out there doing the same thing.
I agree.
And I believe I heard it from some other Republicans. And it's a bit frightening. I don't think it's going to be to a degree where it's, in every city kind of thing, but I think there's going to be pockets. I really do.
Well, we'll find out.
You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that there was a sense of grievous injustice when George Floyd was murdered that people all across the country felt. I think now that Trump has been outed as a thief and a grifter, he's stolen all these top secret documents. He's apparently, well, not apparently, but there are speculations that he has shared them already with, certainly we know he has shared top secret information with the Saudis. That's how Mohammed bin Salman got his list of people to arrest and hold in the Hyatt. He tortured several of them and killed one of them. That was top secret. That was literally out of a presidential daily brief that Jared Kushner took to Saudi Arabia and gave to him. So I think that the outrage on behalf of Trump is fading because of that. That's my point.
Right, but I think my fear is that people on the left are going to be kind of gun shy, thinking that there's going to be this big reaction, and I think that's why they're giving these false warnings, sort of thing, almost like a false flag sort of thing. Now, there might be little pockets of stuff coming up, but I don't believe it'll be a big, organized, hit the streets sort of thing, like we saw with January 6th.
Yeah,
I saw that coming.
And there's no central focus anymore. There's not one place to show up. I mean, you got people harassing the National Archives. You got people harassing the FBI. You got people harassing, election workers and things. But there's not that one central, organizing focus around which this can be done. I think it's going to be a largely impotent movement. But time will tell. Mark, thank you. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. It's 9 minutes before the hour. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, my friend, how you doing today?
Oh, Jumbo. Welcome back,
Jumbo, back at you. Thank you.
And congratulations on your speedy recovery. You know that I was sending positive emanations your way.
I know you were. Thank you.
You started out, Tom, the first hour of the program, speaking about what the gentleman, I believe his name was Mark, just spoke about, and that was Senator Bugs Graham's comment. And this falls on the heels of Trump's CPAC speech. And as you know, I get information from wherever I can get it. I'm not a partisan. I just want the information. And so I held my nose and watched Trump's CPAC speech. And, this stuff used to be the racism, the calls to violence. It used to be, it would be in code. We called it dog whistling. This stuff is very, very blatant now. It's codeless. It's whistleless. And unlike the vibe I just got from you with your conversation with your previous caller, I'm not so sure, Tom, that this isn't potentially very dangerous. And one of the main reasons why is because a lot of these right-wing, racist, fascist are members of the military and the police. I think January 6th may have been a beta run. I don't know this, but it is very worrying for me. And then when you take along with that, when you think about, let's think about the Trump issue. If Trump announces before the midterms and he's indicted, people are going to die. I don't know how many, but there's going to be violence. If he announces after the midterms and he loses the election, there will be violence. If he wins, there will be violence. All the while, we have issues with Iran. Yesterday, U.S. drone towed into port in the Hormuz Strait. We've got issues with Iraq's government being destabilized. It never was stable. China flexing muscle in Taiwan, an economy that's on life support. Tom, I wish I had your optimism, but this looks exceptionally dangerous to me. And let me say this finally. I am hoping that what I see as apathy is the intentional short-sightedness of the American public. I hope it's not blindness.
That's brilliant. Yeah. And what I'm expecting is stochastic terrorism as opposed to a focused attack. I mean, what Lindsey Graham is talking about, people are going to turn into the streets. I think what you're going to see if Donald Trump is indicted is more of the kind of things that we're getting, little drips and drabs. Most of them don't even float up to the level of being national news. They're local news. We've had 2 or 3 instances like this here in Oregon where road rage incidents turn into murders because somebody had a Biden-Obama or an Obama-Biden bumper sticker or things like that, or was driving a Prius. and I just see a whole lot more of that, a whole lot more violent, just kind of random, in-your-face violence coming from bullies associated with the Trump folks. Because I just don't see a central locus other than possibly the elections. And I'm guessing that with Biden as president, we're going to have a pretty significant, presence, although it's up to the states, I guess. I don't know, maybe the federal government can't do it at the polls.
Well, I absolutely concur because we are seeing in Southern California hate crimes, particularly against black people in the United States, are off the chart now.
Yep, and Asians too.
And my concern is that you can have someone like, let's say, and they'll exhume Kyle Rittenhouse some way, the Republican Party will, between now and 2024. Those incidents that you're talking about, these isolated things, could easily become flashpoints for larger conflagrations. That's my concern.
That's true, although I'm guessing that the flashpoint part will probably be the response rather than the action. In other words, a hate crime occurs and then people who are offended by the hate crime pour out into the streets. And then you've got a riot. What do you think? Because it seems to me like a lot of the right-wing militias have been basically emasculated because of their association with January 6th.
Tom, and as you know, I'm sorry, I just have too much, prior history in connection with the military and law enforcement. Yeah. That's where the fear is. Yeah. If you'll remember on January 6th, again, you have thousands of people chasing the cops up the stairs where they will shoot a black man in the streets for selling loose cigarettes or choke him out. These people, these are cops, Capitol Police, they were running. Right. They did not unholster a weapon. They did nothing. And you already know this. There is substantive or evidence that there was collusion with law enforcement during that event. It's true. You know what? It's bad news, man.
Yeah. I guess the bottom line, whether, and I don't think that, the positions that you and I are taking, Kenyatta, are consequentially different, frankly. But the bottom line is that we need to work and perhaps, if inclined, prayers and good vibes or whatever for our country, because we, as you pointed out at the very beginning, we are in a terrible crisis. Kenyatta, thank you. It's always great to hear from you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Today is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on their birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future.
In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development, and why women have better sex under socialism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So in the first, welcome back, by the way. So in the first hour of the program, we talked about how these crisis pregnancy centers that are in many cases funded by religious organizations, the Catholic Church, and now increasingly by Republican-controlled states around the country, are injecting religion into pregnancy. In the second hour, we talked about how Franklin Graham is out now saying, don't worry about climate change, everything's good, God will take care of it, just keep sending me money. Let's do a little bit deeper dive on this whole weird kind of, well, I was going to say all-American, but clearly it's not. It's happening all across Europe, too, of this Christian nationalism movement. My old colleague, shouldn't say old, I've known him for quite a while, Ben Dixon, the host of the Benjamin Dixon Morning Show, the Benjamin Dixon, Dixon show.com is his website. Benjamin P. Dixon is his Twitter handle. Is on the line with us. Ben, it's great having you back. It's been too long.
Tom, it has been a while. It's great to see you.
Yeah, back at you. And so you've been doing a deep dive into this, and I'm really fascinated to find out what you have learned. Tell me, let's first define terms. What is Christian nationalism? Is it really and truly the religion of white supremacy, or is white supremacy simply a kind of a secondary or tertiary feature of it? And why should we be concerned?
You know, I think that white supremacy is the defining feature of it. If you lay the Christian theology side by side with, let's say, Black liberation theology or any other form of theology, you see where they part ways generally is along the lines of protecting the white male Christian power structure. And I get that phrase from Bill O'Reilly, who defined it himself on Fox News, the white male Christian power structure. I do believe that they feel that the white supremacy is not a part of it, or they feel like it's secondary or tertiary. A lot of the Christian nationalists believe that they are genuinely Christian in every sense of the word, and they express love, et cetera, et cetera. But when we see the breakdown of how they participate with others, how they collaborate, or the lack of collaboration, the lack of cooperation, it generally falls along how do they protect the white male Christian power structure in this country.
How do these people reconcile this with the simple reality that the only white people in the whole Bible are the Romans, and they're the bad guys?
Yeah, well, you know, it has been a thorough process over time. I mean, you mentioned Rome, like since the what I consider to be the colonization of Christianity, even by Constantine the Great, using religion as a tool for the powerful. It has taken time, but with time, they've been able to whitewash not only the entire Bible, but Jesus himself. So I don't know if they feel any need to come to terms with it. They have existed. It's almost like being born into a system you don't realize where it came from. In their entire existence, all they've known is a white Jesus.
Yeah, it's very true. And you know, I remember growing up, going to church and seeing white Jesus on the walls of the church. And you know, wasn't until I was probably a teenager that it even occurred to me there was anything weird about that. So Christian nationalism, the roots of this in the United States, I'm guessing, go back a long way, and I'm not talking about just religion being used to promote slavery and things like that, but the modern movement, Rushdoony and his friends and all these other guys back, and particularly in the late 1800s, the 19th century. Is there a line? Is there an identifiable track to the contemporary white evangelical movement? And is the white evangelical movement pretty much most of it, or is it just one of the more visible and out versions of Christian nationalism?
You know, before I can answer that, I would like to just put here, I wonder how many evangelicals thoroughly identify as a Christian nationalist. That has been brought back into the national conversation because of politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene. If you go, I mean, you mentioned the origins. If we take a look at the Ku Klux Klan and the seamless merger between their political agenda and the usage of Christ, the images of Klansmen inside of the church behind.
I think most Americans today have no idea that the Klan was a religious organization. I mean, they organized themselves as a church in many states.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we see that type of organization, whether or not they are going to be as vocal about their white supremacy, the white supremacist parts of it. We see that type of organization happening now. I was so amazed to find out that the Trinity Broadcasting Network, which, I grew up in the Christian church. I grew up, I actually have been on TBN so many times, and I hadn't really paid attention, but they have organized a political movement around religious dogma, and it has the same hallmarks. The only question is are they as vocal with their white supremacy? And now, with the resurgence of white supremacy and the likes of Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene, they are becoming a lot more vocal.
To what extent are they taking the position, whether publicly, overtly, explicitly, or whether in code, that what they're all about is just tribe? Hey, this is our tribe, that's their tribe. We just want to be with our own people. That kind of stuff, which I think cleaves more closely to some aspects of human nature, historically, as opposed to the really toxic version of that Hitler perfected, which is, this is our tribe, that's their tribe, and their tribe is inferior. Their tribe is bad. Their tribe is not just people who believe weird stuff, but they're worthy of death. How clear is the separation between those two positions among white evangelicals, and how close is the white evangelical and the Christian nationalist movements, and to what extent are they separate movements? How close are they toward dancing toward that? Yeah, the other tribe is bad, and we're going to not just kick their ass. We're going to try to do everything we can to destroy them.
Tom, that is the essential question, and that's why I've been mobilizing against it, because for years, as a Black Christian and Black Christians across this country, we've been able to worship with them. We've had white pastors of Black churches, but now we see particularly, and it's sad that so much was this. It's sad that Donald Trump was such an inflection point in American history, but he certainly was an inflection point for the evangelical church to bring those very detrimental beliefs further forward to the front. I like to think of the Scopes trial, where after the trial, the embarrassment that they got sent them back to the dregs of society. And I see a long arc where now Donald Trump has brought them back into the forefront, and the type of language that is coming from them is very dangerous. They are specifically calling now for people to be executed with whom they disagree. And they're expressly going for more political power so that they can make laws to make someone else's sins punishable by the force of law. And then when you juxtapose that next to the fact that they are unable to even moderate their own selves, right? We see the Southern Baptist Church having this 700 cases of sexual assault being investigated. We see the likes of Jerry Falwell Jr. and the kind of fiasco that he had with his pants unzipped. It's almost like religion and laws for you, and don't worry about what we do.
Yeah. Are they reviving the old tropes? I mean, the bell curve kind of stuff?
Tom, as I go through these clips, and particularly clips that are provided by Right Wing Watch, I just want to recognize them. As I watch more and more of these clips, the language is becoming as insidious as that. It's becoming very direct. There's a video that I put out with one young evangelical preacher calling for the execution of anyone who is gay in this country, and he's not alone. There's a lot of language that is now shifting towards...
You've got a Republican political candidate calling for that, calling for gay people to be stoned.
That's right. And so now, with confidence, with the idea that what they have been secretly believing becoming more acceptable in the Overton window, they are becoming more vocal. And the thing is without any pushback from anyone in the Christian community, they are going to continue down this line of encouraging themselves towards a level of bigotry that will cause death.
Yeah, I heard, many years ago, actually, 5-10 years ago, that churches now are the most segregated place in America. I don't know if it's still true. I'm assuming it still is. Where does this end? And what can we do to heal it?
I think in the case of these extremists, these fundamentalists, and I use the word fundamentalist a little loosely here because obviously everyone has their own definition of that. But without a significant pushback from several sectors, number one being from other Christians, being, almost in the sense of moderate Muslims going after ISIS, there has to be progressive and moderate Christians who see the threat that is coming from evangelical circles, and we have to call it out very directly. It's a tribal issue. We must handle it tribally, internally, but also externally. Those of us who can live and coexist with others, no matter what our religion is, the people of good faith is what I like to call us. If we can unite against these threats and show a model of coexistence where we are free to have worship and free from religion at the same time, that's the only way. That's the only way forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. The great Ben Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon Morning Show. TheBenjaminDixonShow.com is the website. Check it out if you're not a regular watcher. And Benjamin P. Dixon on Twitter. Ben, it's always great having you with us. Thanks so much for dropping by today.
Thank you.
Great to see you again. We'll be right back. I want to get into crisis level flooding is closer than you think. Speaking of biblical events, we'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. The climate change is really changing our world, and we have to get a handle on this. And welcome back. Paul in Lucerne, California. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I'd like to talk about CBDs. There's a difference between the CBDs you get from a hemp plant and the CBDs you get from a marijuana plant. Most of the benefits come from the marijuana plant, don't come from the hemp plant. When you extract the hemp and all that stuff, it loses all of it. I have a friend of mine that grows hemp, and he hired me to do security for him. And
I'm sorry, I missed your last sentence.
I have a friend of mine that grows hemp.
Right.
And he found out if you smoke a joint of hemp, it's the best painkiller on planet Earth.
Really?
It works awesome. But if you get the CBDs from it, they don't work. Tommy Chong was all about CBDs. Now he's talking crap about them. Dude, they sold them on the CBD that you got off pot, and then when they started manufacturing the product, they had him put his name to. They used CBDs you got off hemp. It's totally different.
Right.
They're completely different.
Is it that they're, because I thought that they were chemically identical, but very often all it takes is small cofactors, terpenes or a little bit of THC or whatever to change how things work.
CBDs. Yeah, I like CBDs. Okay, because they're when you smoke pot, that's the painkiller in your marijuana is the CBD.
Right.
So I breed my pot to have a lot of CBDs in it. Plus, like I said, I breed, so I will selectively breed every single pot plant I have. That way, when the pot plant's getting ready to winter over, it will load up with more CBDs. Because it wants to winter over to make it till next winter because it got seeded, and I can maybe seed my whole self next year. So it protects itself a little better. And that's how I get more CBD.
Yeah.
And what you do when you take your pot, you take the THC and you cook it at a certain temperature for a certain time, and then you chemically change it into CBD.
Right.
But that's the difference, so because it started off as THC.
Okay. Well, we learn something new every day. Paul, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Jerry in Shopville, Kentucky. Hey, Jerry, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, I like you grew up in church, and one of the main things they tried to teach us in Sunday school was, of course, the Ten Commandments, one of which is, thou shalt not bear false witness. Now, according to the fact checkers, Trump averaged telling something like 10 lies a day or more. I guess some of them may have been the same one he told the day before, but he's still a lie that day, too. So my question is, how can the religious right justify backing somebody that, if you read Proverbs 6, 16 and 17, I believe, says that God hates a liar. So how do they justify that, Tom?
They have concluded that Donald Trump may not be the guy. He may not even be a good guy, but he's their guy. They're calling him King Cyrus. King Cyrus was not Jewish or Christian. I mean, Christianity didn't exist at that time, but King Cyrus sheltered the Jews when they were fleeing persecution, even though he was a Persian king, an Iranian. And so they viewed Trump as the guy who's not really a Christian or not even a good guy, but he's on our side. That's their rationalization.
Well, the thing about that is that Proverbs was supposedly wrote by Solomon, who was, in the Jewish views, the best, king you ever had.
Yeah,
so.
He was their philosopher. He was their philosopher king. You're absolutely right, Jerry. Now, it doesn't make any sense.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, Jerry, but they do have an answer to your question, and they are happy to give it to you. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. It's, 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. And welcome back, 21 minutes past the hour. And 1/3 of Pakistan right now is underwater from floods. Think about that. Pakistan's a big country. It's, it's part of the world. It's basically 1/3 of Pakistan is about the size of Colorado. Excuse me, and it's easy to think of Colorado as a small state, but only when you look at a map of the entire United States. I have driven across Colorado. It is a big state, and that's just the part that's underwater. Flash floods now have killed over 1,000 people, which again doesn't sound like a lot of people given Pakistan, the size and population of Pakistan. 220 million people are in Pakistan. But it is, at number one, no doubt, a massive underestimate of what's actually going on and the number of people whose lives have been destroyed and whose homes have been destroyed and have essentially lost everything. Number one. And number two, as the floods recede, and presumably and hopefully they will, although the monsoon season is not completely over, we will find that the death toll is probably going to be in the tens or hundreds of thousands. And also any kind of water purification systems, wells, food systems. I mean, the thing that comes after things like this, after flooding like this, which destroys the infrastructure. People have lost their homes, they've lost their businesses, they've lost everything. And what comes after that is famine and disease. And that's going to kill, I'm predicting, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Pakistanis. And this has not yet begun to hit Bangladesh. I mean, it is hitting Bangladesh and India. Both of them are suffering from severe weather, but nothing like Pakistan right now. 1/3 of the country is underwater. In the southeastern province of Sindh, one state in Pakistan, they had 67 inches of rain in one day. I mean, just imagine that. We think that 10 inches of rain in a day or 5 inches of rain in a day is flood level here in the United States. It's a massive amount of rain. But in 67 inches in a day, there's just no way you can deal with that. There's no place for it to go. But we're starting to see this all around the world, and there's a simple reason why. The atmosphere is 1.5 degrees warmer right now than it was when Ronald Reagan came into office. And for every degree of warmer temperature, the air can hold about 4% more moisture. And when it releases that moisture, boom, down it comes. And it's not just 4% more. What we're looking at are 100% increases in some places in the amount of water coming down. We had last week, you had flash floods in Dallas-Fort Worth. St. Louis last month got wiped out. Kentucky, dozens of people were killed in eastern Kentucky with flooding. Australia just had 28 inches of rain in one state in 1 month, in a state that rarely gets any rain this time of year. In South Korea, it's torn up parts of the capital, Seoul. Last year, massive floods killed more than 150 people in Europe. I mean, right now they're experiencing drought, but pretty soon the rains are going to begin and they're going to start experiencing floods. This is A, major crisis, but B, it raises an interesting question. And that is, given that what is causing this is global warming, and that what is causing global warming is the worldwide use of fossil fuels, and the reason that we have worldwide use of fossil fuels instead of renewable energy is that in the 1970s and 80s, when this became widely known among the scientists who worked for and the senior executives of America's largest or the world's largest oil companies, as well as the gas and coal companies. These guys knew 40, 50 years ago that this was coming. The guys who knew it are all dead now or retired, but they knew this was coming. Their companies knew it was coming. The United States is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. Pakistan is one of the smallest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world. Do we owe something to Pakistan for causing this terrible disaster? I mean, if you came into my neighborhood and started burning down houses, there would be some liability for that. We're burning down Pakistan or flooding them. Have we no liability? And not we, the United States, although, obviously Pakistan is reaching out to the international community through the United Nations right now, begging for help. But the oil companies just had the largest profits ever. I mean, Pakistan is begging for $2 or $3 billion which would go a long way in Pakistan, out of the United Nations. You had Shell and ExxonMobil and Chevron. I mean, just in the last quarter, these companies showed tens of billions of dollars in leftover money, in profits. Should some of the profits of these companies be going to make whole the people here in the United States, in Kentucky, in Dallas, in St. Louis, across the United States, and around the world, particularly in very poor countries that did not contribute to this climate change crisis? I mean, they're still burning trees and charcoal in Pakistan. Should our companies be anteing up? I think so.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
What say you? And by the way, we just saw this in Jackson, Mississippi. They don't even have drinkable water right now. Should the oil companies be paying for Jackson, Mississippi? Our book today is America on Fire by Dr. Elizabeth Hinton. The subtitle, The Untold Story of Police Violence and Black Rebellion Since the 1960s. I'm reading from the introduction. On a cold Monday at the start of February, Joseph McNeil, Franklin McCain, Ezell Blair Jr., and David Richmond sat down at a whites-only lunch counter at Woolworth's in Greensboro, North Carolina. A waiter refused to serve the young men and suggested they order takeout instead. The four North Carolina A&T students remained at the counter. The store manager approached and asked them to leave. Still, they did not move. A police officer arrived, slapping his nightstick in his hand in an attempt to intimidate. Rather than allow the students' offense against Jim Crow to continue, the manager of the store closed the store for the day. 24 black students returned on Tuesday. Over 50 black students and 3 white students participated in the sit-in on the next day, Wednesday, February 3rd, 1960. News of the protests spread, and soon the sit-in movement had expanded to 55 cities and 13 states. By April, over 50,000 students were involved. Conceived and organized entirely by young people, the sit-in movement ultimately led to the founding of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, SNCC, which was run by activists such as John Lewis and Stokely Carmichael. As a Fisk student, Lewis participated in the sit-ins in Nashville, Tennessee, and he would go on to steer the Freedom Riders in the summer of 1961 and speak at the March on Washington in 1963. Carmichael joined the sit-in movement as a high school student and would famously call for Black Power at the SNCC rally in Greenwood, Mississippi in 1966. Together, Lewis, Carmichael, and tens of thousands of other young black Americans signaled that their generation was prepared to risk their lives for freedom and equality. From Greensboro onward, the sit-ins helped build momentum and support for racial justice. The students in Greensboro engaged in a nonviolent protest to demand full integration, the right to vote, equal educational opportunities, decent jobs, protection against white supremacist terrorism, and an end to police violence. These were the central aims of the civil rights movement more broadly. By the end of the decade, black students at North Carolina A&T State University were still protesting, but now they were destroying property, assaulting police officers, and shooting in the direction of law enforcement, if not coming close to killing cops in self-defense. In May 1969, after black students at Greensboro's James B. Dudley High School were arrested, brutalized, and tear gassed by police during a series of protests against arbitrary disciplinary measures, A&T students came to the teenagers' defense. The confrontations between local police and black high school and college students led authorities to call the National Guard to A&T's campus, unleashing violence and repression that ended in the killing of sophomore Willie Grimes. A pivotal stop on the road to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, by the end of the decade, Greensboro was a site of sustained violence. It was far from unique in this regard. Between 1964 and 1972, but especially between 68 and 72, the United States endured internal violence on a scale not seen since the Civil War. Every major urban center in the country burned during those 8 years. Violence flared up not only in archetypal ghettos, including Harlem and Watts, and in majority black cities such as Detroit and Washington, D.C. It appeared in Greensboro, North Carolina, in Gary, Indiana, in Seattle, Washington, and countless places in between. Every city, small or large, where black residents lived in segregated, unequal conditions. In the North and the South, the East and the West, the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt, black people threw rocks and bottles at police, shot at them with rifles, smashed the windows of businesses and institutions, hurled firebombs, and plundered local stores. These events, what we commonly call riots, or what people who are to the left of center sometimes refer to as civil disturbances, caused hundreds of millions of dollars of property damage. Most immediately, they shaped the lives of the store owners whose businesses were destroyed, of the parents who lost their teenage sons to the police, and of the firefighters and cops who were harmed or killed. But ever since, Americans have been living in a nation and a national culture created in part by the extreme violence of the 1960s and the early 1970s. The aftershocks of that era have, at times, taken the form of mass violence to which all Americans have been witness. In Miami in 1980, in Los Angeles in 1992, in Cincinnati in 2001, and in more recent years, in Ferguson, Missouri, Baltimore, Maryland, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. The enduring impact of the violence of the 60s and 70s has been felt more regularly and more acutely by black people in American cities who faced new policing practices that emerged under the banner of the war on crime. The routine stop and frisks that attacked people's dignity, the breaking up of community gatherings, the presence of armed, uniformed officers in the hallways of under-resourced public schools, and more. Such strategies help repress mass violence as a regular phenomenon, but they ironically made further riots inevitable. Those strategies remain in place today. The book, America on Fire. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour, picking up. Before I get to your calls, I did want to share with you this one last story. This kind of it goes back to back with the story about Pakistan, what's happening in Pakistan, and frankly all over the world. We're seeing this right now in Jackson, Mississippi, where the capital city of Mississippi has no drinking water, no bathing water, no brush your teeth water, and may not for weeks because of flooding. And the flooding is entirely because of climate change. And I'll bet they're not telling the good citizens of Jackson that on their local, particularly if they're Sinclair-owned television stations and whatnot. But in addition to that, there is a new report out about the melting of Greenland. Greenland itself, the continent, has raised itself, my recollection is 6 or 8 meters, like 20 feet since the 1980s. Because it's lost so much ice that the weight has gone, off Greenland and into the ocean, all that water, and the continent is actually lifting out of the sea, which is lowering the sea level around the continent, or the apparent sea level. It's also less gravity around Greenland to pull water toward it, lowering the sea level. But it is raising the sea level for the rest of the world. And what they are predicting is that if the Iceland green sheet is set to lose at least 3.3% of its total mass over the next 20 or 30 years. That's 110 trillion tons of ice, and that will cause global sea levels to rise by a foot. Now, it will be different in different parts of the world, but the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, has predicted that will be a 10 to 12 inch rise in the United States by 2050, which is, just 28 years down the road, if I'm doing my math right? It's not that far from now. And they note if Greenland's ice sheet were to disintegrate entirely, sea levels would rise by more than 22 feet, which would be, no more Florida, literally, and would be a very substantial change. 2021 was the 25th consecutive year in which Greenland's ice sheet lost more mass than it gained. And part of the reason is that in the Arctic and in Greenland, where it used to snow, it's now raining. And rain, of course, melts snow and carries it off to the oceans. So there we go. All right, let's pick up your phone calls here. Joel in Somerset, New Jersey. Hey, Joel, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Been listening for years, and I want you to know I agree with what you say 99% of the time. But you knew that was coming.
I did.
I have to set you straight about Billy Graham, who was He was a virulent anti-Semite.
Oh, geez. It doesn't surprise me, but oh, geez.
In fact, I can read you chapter and verse.
Okay, go for it.
It's short. It's short. This is on the Nixon tapes. You know, one of his occasional pursuits was to hang out at the White House with Tricky Dick, and among the many topics that they discussed, which they shared, was why we hate Jews.
I remember that now. You're absolutely right. Go ahead and read the quote. Yeah, I remember it now.
Okay, here, let me just scroll down.
It's been too many years. Go ahead.
This was from the tapes that were released in 2002.
Right.
And this had been rumored prior to the release of the tapes. Graham denied it, so obviously he was a liar. Quote, "The Jews are the ones putting out the pornographic stuff. The Jewish stranglehold has got to be broken, or this country's going down the drain." And then he revealed what a hypocrite he was. Quote,
These are statements by Billy Graham, not by Richard Nixon.
Right. That those were all from Billy Graham. You know, Nixon was chiming in with why he hated Kissinger and all the other Jews, but he needed Kissinger for this, that, and the other thing. Right. But all the stuff that I mentioned, that I quoted, was from Billy Graham. Okay. Let's see where. Okay. Here's what he revealed what a hypocrite he was. Quote, "I go and I keep friends with Mr. Rosenthal at the New York Times and people of that sort. I mean, not all the Jews, but a lot of the Jews are friends of mine. They swarm around me and are friendly with me because they know that I'm friendly with Israel. But they don't know how I really feel about them and what they are doing to this country. And I have no power, no way to handle the Jews, but I would stand up to them under proper circumstances."
Yeah. Well, I'm on record as saying that Franklin Graham is a grifter and a hustler and a phony.
Oh, absolutely. Well, he's also, his sexual predilections are, in direct contradiction of what he claims to stand.
You sure you're not mixing Franklin Graham up with Jerry Falwell Jr.?
You're right. Yeah. Different grifter.
Franklin Graham used to be a cokehead back in the day. I mean, he was the black sheep of the family, but when his dad was ready to hand over the multi-million-dollar empire, suddenly Franklin Graham became, like the best person in the world. And now he's on TV pitching, call our prayer line and we'll take down all your information and harass you forever to get money from you.
Yes, thank you for correcting me. That was Falwell. I was thinking of the younger Falwell.
Yeah.
But anyway, and then when Billy Graham was confronted with this incontrovertible audio evidence, he said, quote, "If it wasn't on tape, I would not have believed it. I guess I was trying to please Nixon.
Yeah.
I felt so badly about myself. I couldn't believe it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think most of us.
He revealed himself for what he was: a virulent anti-Semite and a hypocrite.
I agree, and sometimes you can get away with saying stuff like that. I mean, his attempted apology or whatever you want to say. I mean, I think probably most people have had a time in their lives when they've been around somebody who's said something just awful about a minority, about women, about whatever, and they didn't speak up. I know I have, and I look back on those moments and cringe. But to go the next step and actually participate in the conversation and amplify the conversation or even initiate the conversation, that's a whole different can of worms there. So, Joel, thanks a lot for the call. Thanks for setting us straight on that. Larry in Huntington Beach, California. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind?
Well, I wanted to give you just a point on teacher pay.
Okay, cool.
My wife and I both worked for 34 years, both with master's degrees. I was an engineer in aerospace. She was an elementary teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I typically earned 30% more than she did, but I worked an engineering man year of 1,525 hours a year. She worked, I tracked it because she worked at nights and weekends. She spent, in that 10 months, over 1,900 hours.
Right.
In addition, my company furnished all the tools I needed. She spent 10 to 15% of her after-tax income every year for materials for her classroom. I think that's a better comparison.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Larry. That's absolutely brilliant. And another reason why, number one, we need to get teachers up to parity with other college-educated people, just immediately. And number two,
and recognize that they don't work an 8-hour day.
Yeah,
they
exactly.
work evenings and weekends to prepare for the classroom.
Yeah, and that was my number two. Well, and then I suppose you could add a number three, that if we were going to have a conversation about going to year-round schooling, then the workload for teachers is going to become even more substantial. And I would say that the big thing that we would have to pair that year-round schooling with is reducing class sizes, and and trying to bring teachers into an 8-hour day rather than the situation that they're all in now, because they got 30, 40, 50 kids in their class, and we don't have high quality programs any longer for gifted kids. Which means that they're acting out and they're getting labeled as ADHD and given, drugs and all this kind of stuff. And we don't have good programs. I realize there are, required ones for learning disabled kids, but we don't, the quality of many of those programs really sucks too. We have so much that we need to do with education. We were doing a good job of this by and large, at least in white communities in the 1950s. We need to be doing this for everybody all across the country now.
But they also need to fix curriculum. I substituted in a math class, 7th grade one time. I was to teach 2 pages in the math book to the kids. With my background in engineering, it took me 45 minutes to figure out what the author had on that 2 pages.
Amazing.
Because our curriculum is terrible, which is a lot of the reason why the schools are not doing very well on international testing.
Yeah, which is a whole another area for conversation. Larry, thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear from you, and particularly your perspective as a guy who has done the math and knows a teacher and has been right in the middle of it. Thank you. Very, very well said, and an excellent punctuation mark to that conversation that has been kind of threading through the program, all 3 hours of the program today. It will be shortly 45 minutes past the hour, and we will pick up the rest of your calls, continue picking up your calls here on the other side of this break. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's your media support group for We the People. And welcome back. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to hear from you. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, I hope your back heals up well. I got back trouble, too.
Yeah, no fun.
Yeah. Hey, I was listening to you earlier talking about Greenland. Mm-hmm. And I imagined a cartoon in the future, near future, some wealthy people sitting in the balconies of their mansions, all flooded out in California, looking out at the sea, watching Greenland float by.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to say, my point was that in this atmosphere of political craziness, the GOP keeps bringing up all kinds of stuff that's just not really a priority to most of us. And meanwhile, climate change, the economy, all these things are everything you've been talking about really matters, and cannabis matters. Cannabis prohibition, is that constitutional? A lot of us don't think so.
Well, there's nothing in the Constitution that says that you have the right to smoke pot, but the fact of the matter is that many of the founders apparently did smoke pot. George Washington went out and separated the male and female plants in his hemp patch.
Well, I just wanted to point out that there is a definitive work on this matter that was done for years. Mm-hmm. Jack Herrera, he wrote the book, and he did various editions of it. It's there. It's to read.
Yeah, I should say George Washington had his enslaved people separate the plants, but in any case, and by the way, they were using cocaine and opium back then too. The opium was called laudanum, and the cocaine had a whole bunch of different names until I think it was around 1910 that they started calling it Coca-Cola.
Well, cannabis was helpful and beneficial to commerce Check out the Napoleon.
They call
Wars.
it tincture of cannabis, and the not the original Declaration and Constitution, but the early drafts of them were published on hemp paper.
And we can do a lot to save the forest or rekindle it, regenerate it by using hemp as a farm crop for fiber and seed oil, and this is not discussed.
I agree. You've been on, Bob, I don't know how long you've been calling this program. It seems like it's been at least a decade, and this has been, your main hobby horse. And I've always agreed with you, and over those years, by the way, we've seen it decriminalized in a lot of states. It's a major crop now in Canada, and I believe it is in some of the northern states.
Continues to be exploited because prohibition. Yeah. What's Russia doing with it? What's Africa doing with it? What's China doing with it? What did China do with it in the very first place?
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah.
Yeah, frankly, I don't know the answer to the question, Bob, if that was rhetorical or literal.
No, China was one of the first societies to recognize the benefits of this plant, and they made fish nets with it. They made paper with it. Thomas Jefferson smuggled seeds out of China to the U.S. a long time ago.
Interesting.
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson's my man, despite his slavery problem.
Yeah, I didn't know. I don't think he'd ever been to China, actually, Bob. But I get your point, and thank you for calling and making it. We'll continue with your phone calls right after this. Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. We're right here. Thom Hartmann with you, defending America from the conservative weapons of mass deception. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. An amazing story out of New Hampshire, the state legislature. This was after, in Virginia, the new governor, Glenn Youngkin, who ran as I'm not Donald Trump, and then immediately put up a tip line for parents to turn in for parents to report their kids' teachers if they say something subversive. Now in New Hampshire, they've got a law that prohibits the dissemination of certain divisive concepts related to sex and race. Those divisive concepts being that people could be unconsciously racist. A conservative moms group has put up a $500 bounty in New Hampshire for the first person who could destroy the reputation and career of a teacher using this new law. So the teachers union sued the state of New Hampshire, and now the Republicans in New Hampshire, who control the state, are fighting back by putting up a new law that is going to require teachers to take a loyalty oath and ban any, quote, any negative account or representation of the founding and history of the U.S. It's nuts. There's a video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Ten minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Scott in Oakland, California. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, glad to talk to you. Listen, I'm calling about the Alex Jones threat.
Yeah.
And you had
the Lindsey Graham threat. They're both saying essentially the same thing.
Yes, you had the book reading of Hannah Arendt, where they turned their plans for what they're going to do into prophecy by actually doing it.
Mm-hmm. I don't catch that because it plays during the break and I don't hear that.
Right. Well, the Hannah Arendt's argument about the nature of totalitarianism is they tell you what they're going to do by saying that's what their enemies are going to do, and then they do it. Okay.
Sometimes that's called projection.
In
this case, it's prediction.
With this case with the Alex Jones prediction, and this is what it would look like. This is exactly what it will look like. It will look like exactly like the July 7th, 2016 BLM shooting in Dallas. I don't know if you recall. Everybody seems to have forgotten about it.
Sorry.
Well, 5 police officers were killed in a hail of gunfire from snipers, where the reports were from multiple witnesses that there was a triangulation of fire, meaning at least 3 shooters. They ended up killing one guy, Mika Johnson, who was supposedly a black nationalist who hated police, by blowing him up in a garage with a robot. but all of the police, everybody reported a triangulation of fire. This is exactly what it will look like if Alex Jones' wish comes true. They caught 3 people escaping the scene wearing body armor in Dallas on East 35th at West Keist Avenue. They were brought in. The police chief had a midnight press conference where he described them as uncooperative and that they were going to break these people to get them to tell what they knew. This is exactly what it will look like.
Yeah, this is the stochastic terrorism that I was talking about, where the great leader gives the pitch, and then some wacko or a small group of them out there in West Wazoo land decides to take up arms.
Exactly, but I don't know if you recall, but the Maidan Square massacre, Paul Manafort's daughters in Ukraine, right? Where dozens of people were killed by mysterious snipers. Right, I
was going to say Saakashvili. What was the name of the guy who was the head of Ukraine at that time? The Putin guy.
Yanukovych.
Yanukovych.
Manafort worked for him. His daughters, after that Maidan Square sniper attack, cut him off, said that he has blood on his hands. Why they did that, we don't know. But Paul Manafort was still working for Donald Trump on July 7th, 2016. Okay?
Wow. Yeah, I got it.
I saw this attack as a provocation against Black Lives Matter by elements on the right. It's got a history. Look it up. They do it all the time. It's coming. Be prepared. Don't get fooled.
I'm with you, Scott. And like I said, do a search on, pull up DuckDuckGo or Google or whatever and type in
Gladio.
Stochastic terrorism, STOCHASTIC.
Or Gladio.
I'm sorry?
Gladio.
What's Gladio?
GLADIO.
Was that another search engine, or is that another form of terrorism?
Yeah, that was the years of steel in Italy to turn people against the left, where the right wing was committing.
Okay.
GLADIO. Our Gladio is coming. I'm telling you, it's coming.
All right, let me make a note of that, because that sounds like something that I should. GLADIO. Okay, I will look into that. Scott, thank you very much for the call. Kevin in Mason, Ohio. Hey, Kevin, what's on your mind today?
Thanks, Tom, and thanks for your editorial on your dream about what Trump was really doing. I posted on Facebook. I'm calling about The Prophet's Way, which A Guide to Living in the Now, your first book that I know of, and my wife and I read it to each other, and I recommend it to anyone living with anyone else that could share out loud, but read it silently. On page 280, you say, and this whole thing with the Apache, the dance of the little girl in buckskin, and I mean, it's just so powerful, Tom. It tells me a lot about why we have little people being raped in this country. I mean, if we had that kind of reverence for life that these Apache people demonstrate, we'd be way better off. But
we've lost so much indigenous wisdom. It is such a tragedy.
They worship. I mean, and she says, we believe in one God and always have. We pray before the sun, not to worship the sun, but because it reminds us of the Creator. And on that page 280, she says, we respect the animals and honor them because they're part of God's world and His creation. So I know we're almost out of time, but I want to recommend you and people watch on Amazon Eating Our Way to Extinction. I think it's a very big part of why we're losing our planet.
Yep, I'm with you. Kevin, I got to run, but thank you. Thank you very much. And that was my essentially autobiography, or spiritual autobiography. Anyway, I wrote that back in the 80s. Thanks so much for being with us today. It's been a fascinating day. Tomorrow will be another one. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It does require all of us. Seriously, you can't have a democracy if you don't have a demos, if you don't have active, involved people. The population, that's us. That's you and me. So double check your voter registration. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. And have a great afternoon. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!